All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Tuesday, February 4th, 2025 Planning Board meeting. This evening, we have our yearly training session, if you will. And with that, it is 6:05. We'll call the meeting to order. With us this evening, we have myself, Matt Provenzel, the chair. To my left, our vice chair, Joyce Leary Clark, and Jeff Bruchot, and our new planning board member, Camille White. And to my right, we have Carolyn Lane and Jim Moyer, with Matt DiCiani absent this evening. And also with us, we have our city staff members, Shannon Chisholm, Lauren Forte, and Rosalie Turner. And with that, we'll move to our first item, our approval of minutes. And do we have those? Were those completed?
I believe those minutes are going to be provided at the next meeting, as I don't see them linked in the agenda.
Okay, great. I thought that's what Emily had mentioned last night. Great. So we'll look for those at our next meeting. Our next item is our public comment period. That's an opportunity for all members of the public to come before the board and address any planning comments for our input or questions. No one with us this evening, so we will continue along. With that, we have with us this evening our city engineer, Joe Leverrier, and he is going to provide us some plan review training this evening. We'll go over some civil engineering plans, and I guess with that, I'll let Joe take it away. And I guess for board members, this was something that Emily and I had discussed a few months back now, just as far as having Joe come sit with us and speak briefly about overall big picture of civil engineering plans and site plans to kind of give us tips and tricks and help us really fully understand some of these drawings that we review here.
I didn't realize we're all going to be sitting kind of like this formal way. I thought.
Well, we could
get around the table.
I guess we could go around the table if.
Yeah. So I don't teach plan reading like as a off the side at night or at some shop or anything like that. But certainly know how to read plans. So Emily asked. I'm happy to sit down, walk through some things, answer some questions. Part of what I asked her a little bit, and so I guess I would ask you, is just a little bit of questions about like. What are some of the things that you're interested in learning more about? If there's particular things that you're interested in getting more information on. So kind of what do you find to be the struggles if there is such a thing on reading a plan, or is it like plan scales? Some people have a hard time with scales of plans and using scales, if that's something that you get into or not. Is it site plans, grading, utility type of things, or is it some of the aspects that you're seeing in plans that you might want some more information on or knowledge? So a little bit was about maybe getting a little feedback from you all in terms of what some of the topics might be, so that we kind of hit those things. I know we've got 45 minutes or an hour or whatever she allocated here for us. So I just want to make sure we're also maybe if there's some topics that you're interested in hearing a little bit more about.
Yeah, that's good, Joe. I guess I have in my head a lot of items that I think we could hit. I guess does it work best, you think, if we just kind of come and hang out around the table?
Yeah,
or
so
then we can kind of point at things and.
Sure. Yep. So what I did was
that works for board
I
members?
also told Emily I'd print a few sheets. This is a project that you folks may or may not have ever seen. It is in Saco, but it's not a private development project or whatever. This was something that the city looked at years ago and never moved forward on. So it was just a set of plan, or some sheets that we can leaf through, and if there's certain things of it that you'd like to just, talk a little bit more about, we can do that. And they're different sheets. Some are layout plans, some are grading plans, utility plans.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, well, if we can
Yeah,
climb
come
up
on
there.
over.
I know this is going to be a little bit awkward. I can help set up the table, but when we are at the table, I'm still going to have you guys speak into the mics.
Yes.
Happy to put 2 mics on the table if you think that would be helpful. I just something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Will it get us if we're standing here? So again, maybe if there's certain topics that you all have interest in, I guess.
Well, I guess I had at first.
I'm sorry too that these don't pick up very well, so you're going to have to like hold.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So I guess, Joe,
Let me show you what I brought. so you
Yeah.
So, again, this one so this is a set of plans I did. So I'm not trying to, I'm trying not to be like I'm showing someone else's drawing. So this is a set of drawings the city did at one point in time. Maybe you all saw this. The city was looking at doing public services, public works that was going to be out on Foss Road at one point in time. So that's what this set of drawings is. This never went forward, obviously. But this set of drawings, the way our office always did stuff, and I think you'll find, no 2 sets of drawings do you see that. No engineers prepare plans the same. Some are a lot easier to read than others. That doesn't make them good. It doesn't make them bad. It's just, that's the way it is. And so you have to kind of fight through some of that, unfortunately. But like this drawing set had this is like the index. Like these are some of the sheets that you should see, what they are. This covered the utility contacts, permits, like what permits we'll be getting and the status of them at that time. So this was a partial, I guess this was when we submitted things to the state. So it just kind of gave you all the permits we were getting, what they were pinning, who the consultants or other engineers, professionals involved in preparing the plans, who they were. So you kind of had that information. A locust map, title of the project type of thing. You can skip all these general notes things. You see all these on plans. But I think some things that people sometimes have issues with, I mean, some of it's pretty straightforward, but that's the map. It's the legend of, what the symbols mean on the plans. So like this set of drawings was organized in this fashion. So there was a legend, and these symbols, in theory, were used throughout the entire plan set. So once you know these, you're kind of good to go. This one was the overall existing conditions plan, and I know sometimes, I would say, on some of our sets that we see come in, some do a really good job with this, and others, don't give us a real good existing conditions plan sometimes. So I know that's sometimes some of the things that we're always looking for. This particular one, it's showing aerial topography as well as wetlands, like stream setbacks. We had soils, test pits, or borings done, so like those are all shown. So again, reading this plan, its boundary, what is the purpose of this plan is to try to give somebody a sense of what are the existing conditions or constraints. So in this one, it was wetlands areas that are in this gray tone shade here. So there was this little another little legend here that kind of gave you what the wetlands were. Vernal pools, we had a few vernal pools in this site, so they were these kind of little V symbols or whatever here. Stream setbacks, and the jurisdictional streamline. So that's what this one is. This is where the landfill is. You all know where that is. So this is Sandy Brooks, kind of runs through here. Topography, I know some people have a hard time with topography. On this one, it's a large site, so it was aerial-based topo. So that's, again, on the front side, it kind of lists the source, but these dashed line contours are the existing topo. So every time you see one of these, and I will tell you, this plan is not the best for that, readability of this, because you have to read these contours, but these were 5-foot contour intervals, so you've got to find these numbers. And that can be a challenge sometimes. So like you try to label them, like this is 140, so that means that if you trace that line around, it's kind of like cutting a cake, in slices, and if every one of these contours, if you could cut this piece of paper and raise it up to 140, then this next one here at 135 would be 5 feet lower. So if you can imagine that, you'll kind of see the lay of the land. Again, existing conditions with edges of roads. So Foss Road that runs in here, the parking lot area. Those are the type of things we're trying to get off onto this plan or have people understand where existing features are. You see a lot of people now that'll want to use aerial background drops, which I think are super easy for some people mostly to see. So sometimes that might be something, if you're having a hard time with existing conditions, that might be something you try to encourage people to kind of give you is that aerial plan. I find more people understand or see an aerial plan better sometimes than they do see all just line work. But again, it's, to me, when people are presenting stuff on a blueprint, shading is okay. I'm not a huge fan. I think you guys are starting to see there's a lot of engineers now that want to use color on drawings. And to me, that's just like drafting 101. It's like when you start to have to put color on a plan, something's going wrong. Like, you know, but it does help. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, so this plan here it's good graphically. So big picture, we can see the focus area is within this big dash line. We've got the big tags here for test pits.
Yep.
We have some borings here.
Yep.
We've got the ponds. We've got these big setbacks.
Yep.
We've got the setbacks here. These are a different line pattern. That's sort of the overall big picture to start when we're looking at these. If it's not easily identifiable here, it's going to get lost, and it's going to be hard to look at and find things and understand. Contours, of course, that typically is the harder one. For example, I guess, Joe, could you maybe give a way for maybe board members to understand, like, so we've got the layers here, but for example, how do we know that maybe this one's a little bit easier, where's water going to go here? So
Yeah, so
versus when we start to see this in swales.
Yeah. So again, what engineers will draw, when you see watershed boundary maps, sometimes you look at the stormwater, if any of you are looking at the stormwater management plans that come in and they'll
Every
start to
one of
draw-
us.
Oh, do you really?
Yeah.
Wow. Jeez,
Everyone's nodding their
perfect. Yeah, well then we'll bring Adam in to teach you guys.
Properties have weathers.
Yeah, well, and so again, in theory, right, I mean, again, these contours are not going to be perfect. I mean, you see they're very smooth and generalized. Again, this is aerial topography. If you go out there, you may find some little pits and mounds in everybody's little lawn and things kind of run. But generally what happens is water flows perpendicular to contours. So that's the direction. And if this is the high, if this is your high spot, so if this is the 150 contour here, then basically the top of the hill should be somewhere in here. So if you saw a watershed map, somebody would be drawing a divide, probably like this. And so if a drop of water lands here, it's going to start to flow, say, in this direction here, or if it lands just on the other side, it's going to start to go, say, this way. And you're always drawing lines. If you're trying to follow which direction it's supposed to flow in, it would be running perpendicular. It's always trying to run perpendicular to contours. If you just keep drawing lines and you just kind of heat each one of those perpendicular as best you can, that's going to be your flow path. You get to places like this, and you see these kind of little, funky contours. This is probably a little bit of a, little grading ditch line or whatever. So again, that one's probably coming out here, and then it's going to flow in between, and it's going to head out in this direction, and then eventually join up into this stream, or what was this little wetland or stream that came off the site here. So water directions are always perpendicular to contours. They're a little harder to see when you find like where the stream is, because you'll see contour lines that they're kind of chasing up the stream or whatever, and then eventually they're going to cross over and come back on the other side. So a ditch line, a contour for a ditch line is always like an inverted V. So the very bottom of the ditch is going to be at the bottom of the V, and then it's flowing so the next V for the ditch would be like this. I'll show you that on a proposed plan because it's a little clearer. But the flow line at the bottom is always going to be right at the bottom of that V line. Like this was trying to show you a little bit of a ditch line right along the road here. Contours are hard, especially existing conditions contours, because they're not as uniform. They're very irregular, you know, like when you see these little regular patterns like this. But generally, if you follow, a lot of times for me, if you, let me just,
And if anyone wants a chair, just let me know, and I can get us more comfortable.
because a lot of times when plans are really busy on contours, I end up taking my own little marker and I'll just do like, there's a 150 contour. And then let's just say we're trying to do 10-foot contours. So that's every 2, because every one of these is 5 foot. So the next one is 40. And you start to draw where these go. And this one's 30. And it's doing, you know, coming around over here like this. And sometimes you'll start to see how these features kind of relate to one another. That you don't always see sometimes if you just look at the plan. And if you add a little bit of, you know, trace them around on some of these, you can start to see how, and I'm not sure I'm standing on every 2-footer right this second.
Sure.
But you'll start to see that that's, you know, this general hill's going this way, this one is starting to go this way, so you can kind of follow them around.
And we have been seeing a lot of plans coming in where we'll start to see if there are 5, 10-foot intervals, we'll start to see those are a darker, bolder line, or they, you know,
Yep.
folks are starting to graphically make those lines read as more important, so we can start to follow some of those through. So
Yeah,
that's-
I didn't bring it, I had another set of drawings that I could have brought. It was a little bit smaller, it's a half-size set. So, but again, when you see a lot of topography on sites, so the one that I'm thinking of is, it's a site that, again, it was another site that I did, because before I was down in Saco, but we had a lot of topography on it. And we were showing every 1-foot contour, so that every 5-foot contour, we changed the line so that it was more of a heavy dash. And then you'd have, you know, 4 more lines and another heavy dash, and 4 more lines and a heavy dash. And that becomes a lot easier for people to see or follow. So I think that's something that, you know, when you're starting to see drawings come in, I don't think it's, I don't know how people take the comments if you give them to them as a planning board, but to me, if I'm the engineer, I want my plans to be readable. And if you can't read my plans, there's a problem. And so I think if you're having an issue on, like if you get a plan that's really busy and you say to the consultant who comes in, say on an application, and you say, geez, I'm having a hard time following your contours, is there a way you guys could make like the 5-footers stand out, or the 10-footers, the major contours? That's easy. That should be just a quick flip of the switch for these guys now on CAD to be able to do those things.
Yes.
And I think those things can make it so much easier for you. Sometimes if you just get line after line after line, it's really hard. If you start, like, I don't mind doing some of this, like you start chasing these around, but when you start getting on busy plans, you can do a lot of that.
Yeah, because there are things like you've started outlining here in this 130, and then we're going up here 40, 50,
Yep.
and then we're looking here, so this
That's a 40.
140. So if the plans graphically, if this 140 is highlighted in this 130, and then here we're at 140, we can graphically really quickly, we can see we've got a little bit of high spot here, we've got a high spot here, and then we've got some low spot in here, and that starts to make sense. There's some road in here, and then we can start understanding, like you said, where's the water going here. So things like that, then we can understand high, low spot in between, so we can expect swales, expect water to get out of here in a fashion.
Yep.
Things like that, just to kind of quickly understand and see the terrain.
Right, but so again, I
Clearly.
think what's important on the existing conditions plan is that, you know, the information that they should be trying to convey are, you know, existing topography. Tree lines are becoming a bigger thing, I know for the board for sure. This one, I don't know that we really did show, I guess we do have a tree line over here, but it's not like it's super, you know, standing out for you. This one, our biggest issue is because there was a lot of potential wetland impacts for this one. It was more about displaying where the vernal pool issues were, where the streams were, where the wetlands were, and the associated setbacks to those. So that was
Sure.
really the main purpose of this drawing for this particular project.
Yeah, because there's a lot of times where the board will go out for a site walk, and we learn a lot by going out there.
Yep.
So that's good.
But like existing topography, I mean, knowing if that's one of the things that you want, we can either come back another time, and I can have some other things for you that might be a little bit more, other scenarios, or like what you see or what to look for, or whatever. But again, not knowing exactly what you wanted to focus on today, I just thought I'd just bring a smattering of these plans.
Yeah, no, I think this is good, and board members, please speak up. But we usually have a lot of questions about water. We have where the runoff is going, neighbors asking about, existing conditions and making sure that they're not getting worse. And it's every few applications we have residents come in. It's wet now, road's wet, my front yard's wet when it rains, and, how is this project going to impact me? Like, it's got to get better.
Yeah, and
sort
that's
of thing.
harder and harder especially with people wanting infill development to happen. It's
Right.
tighter, smaller spots, things are going in. It's a challenge, no doubt about it.
Right. Okay.
So the next one, I'll just leave through these and we can come back, we'll circle through.
Yeah.
So this one again was really just to be, this was a large site, obviously, so this was really just supposed to be an overall kind of, what we call the overall master development plan. So again, it was just trying to lay in on top all of the constraints that you saw in the existing conditions, but now just try to show the overall development that the city was proposing at the time. This is a very busy plan because of the scale of it. When we went to each individual one, so we'll just flip through this for a second. So then we went to, this is a layout plan. So again, it's not showing topography. So again, the purpose of this plan is to just show what are you proposing. So this one is, buildings, parking lots, sidewalks, trails, whatever. This one had some athletic field components to it. You obviously don't see that on every project necessarily. So you're talking about, signs, dimensions, layout. Like eventually, you folks don't see this so much, but this is the drawing, or this is where you would give your information. Back in the day, when people didn't have all the electronic equipment they have today to build things, this is the plan that the contractor would use to lay everything out by. So now, today, almost every contractor gets these drawings electronically. They load them up into their computers, and the equipment, when it rolls out, everything is done by GPS, and they know exactly where they are in relationship to this plan now, for the most part. So layout is not so important anymore, other than dimensionally correct drawings are what's important. But on these ones, this is the one where, again, the scale of the drawing, what am I looking at? Every plan should have, hopefully a graphic scale is important. But this plan here was created at 1 inch. 1 inch is 60 feet. So again, I don't know if any of you do use scales or do try to use that, or if and you probably don't. I mean, but I'm just saying, because like these were all dimensioned, but if this didn't have this string of dimensions, then in theory, if you've got a scale, and I don't know again if each one of the board members uses a scale, wants to use a scale, but if you know what the scale of the drawing is, you could actually figure out what dimensions all of these are drawn to. But again, this plan is really just trying to give you that basic layout of dimensionally where are things sitting on the face of the earth. These are generally fairly easy to read because they're not super busy. At least I find them to be fairly easy. So again, the office that I worked at, the goal of the layout was to give you everything, all your dimensions were out there. Eventually, when this would go to construction, we would generate like coordinates of all of these things so that the contractor could use it. And like I said, today they just get the CAD file and no one does that anymore.
Yeah, and again, this one's, it's graphically nice because it gets the overall big picture. We can see the parking, we can see the fields, we see some of the wetland areas in here. We have these wet ponds and the treatment areas highlighted. We've got sidewalks highlighted here. line types for buildings, so it's sort of good graphically. We've got good tags on some of these notes, back for signs, so it's good. That's sort of, I guess, for me, overall big picture was kind of helping board members, and this is a discussion that I haven't had, but just so board members don't spend hours upon hours searching for information and sort of tools and big picture pieces on what we're looking at and how to get there.
So I think what you also tend to see is there are people that they try to minimize the number of drawings, like, right, so in a set. So they'll try to combine things. So like, again, on ours, we always did ours as, this was a layout plan. So it's not showing anything to do with utilities. It's not showing anything to do with drainage. It's not showing anything to do with contours. It's just a plain old layout sheet. You'll see some that'll start to take this, and then they'll try to put utilities on top of it, and sometimes they'll even put grading on top of it. They'll put it all on one big plan. And sometimes that's fine. There's other times that you just layer so much stuff on there, it just becomes really hard to read. So again, if we'll flip to this next one for a second, and this one is like the grading plan. So again, proposed grading, again, everyone does things a little bit differently, but for the most part, most plans are done with existing contours as being like this light kind of dashed concept, and then proposed grading is done as a solid line, and it's darker, bolder. That's pretty typical of the way most people draft today. But if you took that and you tried to lay it on top of this with contours or dimensions and number of parking spaces, and you start putting all that information on the same drawing, and it becomes really hard to read sometimes. So again, I don't think I don't think it's unreasonable if you're having a hard time reading someone's drawings, is to maybe ask them to do that. I mean, you could say, hey, this is a hard plan for us to see. Is there a way you can split grading away if that's part of the issue too?
Yeah, and I think it's so like on this plan here, we can see the overall site layout, like you said, and then it helps understand just that, the lay of the land. So we understand there's fields, there's parking, there's some structures here. Then we hit this plan.
Yeah.
We've talked about some of the contours, and then we can start to see here. So we're high here, and we're low back here, and there we go. We've got a catch basin in here. So
right.
Water's coming across the parking in this area here, and then vice versa here. It's low down here, high here, catch basin. And then, like we were talking about, here's a swale, water's going back down here. Just sort of overall,
yeah, so this one here again,
kind of expectations as to how we...
If you kind of broke that divide, Matt, it would be, it's kind of like there was a high ridge here.
Right.
So again, if that rainwater landed here, it's flowing perpendicular to these contours again. So this one would come down here. There's a piece of curb along the edge of the parking lot here, and then it would run down along and get into this catch basin, or if it came down, it would get into this catch basin. And then again, if rain landed here, it would come down, and it's trying to go perpendicular to contours, so this one would actually kind of leak out and come across like this. This one would come down and come down to here. The only thing I would, so see, I'm going to correct you on this one.
I know,
This one's actually a high spot. So this is actually a walkway or a trail. And again, it looks like it could be a ditch, but when you think about, so this is why I was interested when I said to Emily, because for someone, and for someone who looks at plans like all the time, I look at a plan and I see what it is. It's the parking lot, I see this, this is kind of like built like a high mound, right? So this was intended to be a trail. And when you look at the contours of that, it looks very much the same as a ditch, it's inverted, right? So if you actually look at the numbers, this is the 130 contour, which I'm gonna highlight it best I can here, which is doing like that. And I'm just gonna jump down a couple. So this is the 125 contour. So it's going like that. Obviously, 125 is lower than 130. So this is higher than there. So that's actually reflecting like a raised berm, right, that's going down. If it was the other way around, if this was 130 and that was 125, then that would be more of a, because then you'd be a ditch. 130 would be draining down into the 125. So they graphically look very similar, but they're just the anti of that, you know what I mean? So you do have to look at the numbers to follow that one. But anyway, so this one is showing a lot of grading that's coming around the outside edge, and then all the grading going down into a stormwater pond, another stormwater pond there, little stormwater facility here.
And then you mentioned it, you hit the other item was curbs.
Yep.
And curbs also as tools to direct water.
Yeah, and so that's another one that I find, there's a larger plan, a larger layout plan that we're going to get to here in a second, I think. I think I printed it. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I didn't. Because I also find, like here, there's a note that says slip. There's a larger version. I guess I printed you this one sheet, but there's a larger version of this layout plan that's part of this set. And graphically, curb is everybody does things a little bit differently, but like ours, we used to use a legend where the curb symbol was kind of like this dash thing like this. So you'd see two lines with like this thicker dash in it. So it was it was easy to see. I find that hard on some of the plans we get in Saco. There's a lot of engineers that I'm constantly asking to make the curb, like I'll see a note, it'll say curb. Like, and it's like, well, where's the curb? Like, I can't, you know, and you can kind of tell that curbing is meant to go along the edge over here, but it's like, how clearly is that being defined? And those are things that you should be able to, you should know where those are. Because later on, we're ending up going out, a lot of times, I mean, you don't see this, but that's like what Rob Lamar does now, or Tom Duross did when we had the field our inspectors are going out and they're going on sites. We're, you know, most contractors are very good to work with us. So, but a lot of times we're like, well, no, that's not clear. The curb needs to go all the way up to here, and that's because we're trying to capture all this drainage or whatever the case may be. And a lot of times it's just the drawing isn't super clear. And so but it should be. So like here, like we would call out like end of curb. Like, so this one had just curb going around the corner here. And again, I should have brought the bigger sheet so you could have seen a little clearer there. But that is one that I think some plans are hard to see. And again, everybody does curbing a little bit differently, how they show it. So that's one that, again, I can definitely help you guys with that. If that's something, I mean, because I'm asking for that question too when we see people come in, is making sure it's clear.
I just have a question. Yeah, so in terms of curbs, just a little loud. What would you say is like a best practice when it comes to like a main road like that? Like things that we should be looking at when it comes to like curb cuts and just how it would impact, you know, certain things along the road?
Well,
for example, maybe, use this as an example, things that might jump out at you as a red flag.
well, so this isn't really a typical plan. I mean, a typical development, I guess I'd say, because most of the time you folks are looking at residential subdivisions or you're looking at a commercial site that we're talking about, like a curb cut into the site. This one was a parking lot, right? So that's fine, coming out onto the road. This was one where the city was after, and on this particular project anyway, they were trying to develop kind of a little rec building here. There was going to be a drop-off area. So they were kind of creating an area where kids could get dropped off. So it was a little bit different than what you're normally seeing. I mean, I think our standards that the city has now, like when it comes to residential subdivisions and whatnot, we pretty much tell people where they can have curb cuts for like single-family homes and where they can't have curb cuts. So I think that's something that Public Works kind of takes care of for you guys. When you get to the commercial lots that are coming out onto Route 1, let's just say, or some, you know, major road or whatever, we're trying to Again, we have standards on how often you can have curb cuts. We try to minimize curb cuts. Everybody wants more, but we try to minimize curb cuts. And then really, we're trying to make sure that vehicles can get, we want to have the curb cuts as small as you can, but at the same token, we want to have vehicles be able to get off those roads conveniently, right? So we don't want cars having a hard time turning off of, say, Route 1 where people are traveling at 50 miles an hour or 70 miles an hour or whatever they're doing. So we try to take those all into account when we're looking at people's projects.
And sidewalks, I assume, like
Yes.
how they interact with sidewalks and pedestrian traffic.
Yep. So again, if you're having sidewalks immediately adjacent to, say, the roadway or a parking area or whatever, it really should have a curb, separating it. So those are things, you should be looking for. Hopefully, that's coming on all your projects like that. We do have some places where sidewalks haven't in the past been built like that, where they were like either an expansion of the roadway shoulder, and I think that's, not ideal by any stretch of imagination, so we're trying not to, propagate that moving forward, but that usually comes with drainage. The minute you curb something on a road, it comes with drainage. So that's one of the reasons why people try to avoid those things. But.
How about Joe, for a moment, talking about like landscape islands?
Yeah.
Sizes, expectations.
Well, that's where we'll mix, because I know that Regina does most of or planning does, but, and I think that's something that I think Regina's working with Emily on to try to go through and revamp some of the landscape standards in the city.
Yes.
I know that there's standards about certain amount of, landscape areas that are supposed to be within the parking, say, fields or lots or whatever areas. I don't know that this meets that standard, I'll be straight up honest with you.
No, I don't think it does.
Yeah, it probably doesn't.
No, I guess I'm thinking like, so we've got 12, you have 12-foot islands here, and I guess when we work with engineers and look at things, we sort of expect a minimum of 10 feet.
Yep.
To get any vegetation to survive and be successful in scenarios like that. So,
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you this end cap island here was a pretty typical one that we used to use on most of our parking lots at the time. Most parking lots, when you get to this outer edge, that radius is a 10-foot radius. We would do it's a 2-foot radius on the inside that kind of returns it, so 10 into a 2 gives you the 12-foot island. And, I think most landscape planters, at least if you can get that kind of size, that's usually big enough that you can, survive things in. Certainly bigger is, I'm sure, is better. I think by the city's ordinance, you'd have to have, right now you'd have to have more frequently. You'd probably have to have one here and one there or something like that. You'd have to have a couple. And then lighting comes into play. I don't remember if this probably had, back in the day, I'm not sure if because usually lighting, like if you know the spacing of your lighting, usually you're trying to land your islands where your lighting is and to keep the lights in the landscaped island to help protect them as well.
how about other things that you're looking for as well, like some of the turning movements? And I know sometimes we have conversations, and
Yep.
I know sometimes we wish we could have a conversation with you at the moment and say, we know you asked for this or that and move this or just that crosswalk down, and sort of understanding overall big picture that you're looking for something or asking for something that maybe we haven't grasped. So I guess maybe just generally speaking, some thoughts like that. I know.
Yeah, I mean, so for me, at least on the site plans when they come in, usually, I mean, I won't be a Dave Pendleton moving forward, but Dave is always very good about, I'm usually looking for input from him on where the fire department's looking to get to, especially on sites. Where are you trying to get to? And then once once I know that, then usually we're asking the applicant to show us the turning movement diagrams. I also have the turning templates for it, so I can apply them to the plans for Dave and say, yeah, we can make those turns or we can't make those turns. But generally, we put the burden of proof, obviously, is on the developer to show that, or the applicant to show that. So I'm not sure if you folks always see all the turning movement diagrams. They probably come in the packets, maybe, I'm not sure, but we'll get them for the areas that he's interested in. So there's ones that will be focused on, say, for the fire department. There will be others where if it's a commercial development and we're talking loading dock areas or whatnot, then we're interested in the size vehicle that's, we're looking for the applicant to tell us what size vehicles is this site being designed for. Are we talking about tractor-trailer trucks? Are we talking about box trucks or that type of thing? And then there's different turning templates, obviously, for those different size vehicles. And we'll look at those, again, for each location where they're going, if it's the loading dock, dumpster area, or whatnot. Passenger vehicles are pretty simple. I mean, if most of them are traditional, 24-foot drive aisles. I mean, I know people are trying to squeeze things down wherever they can. Some of that's fine, for sure, but there's other times you want to try to make sure it's still got the width that you want.
I was just hoping we could kind of take a second and touch base still on elevation, starting with the topography.
You want to go back to the existing?
And the benchmarks. Well, no, just so that, I think some of us are pretty familiar. We work with plans a lot, and some of us aren't as much. And I feel like I see this, over my service on the board, is that sometimes the existing conditions map doesn't mean a lot when people look at it, and we do a site walk, and and particularly in this infill, we're looking at a lot of forested wetlands for residential subdivisions, and I think that it's sometimes hard for people to envision what the actual grade's going to be. And it's important to note that those benchmarks that we talk about are consistent throughout the plan. So when they look at the original topography, and everything's 103, 104, and then you look and the road all of a sudden is up at 106, 107, that now there's a 3-foot mound there, and they're kind of looking at the projection plan, not realizing that what we walked on the site walk is the existing site, and that roadbed is now going to be 3 or 4 feet higher, and depending what they fill. Because we've had some issues where the developer will go in and he's not going to retain control over the proposed lots. He's going to let it be built out by others. We might have very specific concerns from neighbors about grading, and we have to try to put some conditions on certain lots, usually from some of your guidance from your department. And I just think it's important if we all can kind of truly understand that when you're looking at the finished plans, and the road profiles are showing up a lot now. And I think that's a newer one that's helpful in some ways, to give like a side profile and take that number and mentally put it in your head, and then look back on the original plans and go, wow, this area is really being built up.
Yeah, you won't, so generally, like profiles are ones that you would see on like a subdivision, right? So generally roadways, people generate profiles for roadways. You don't see a lot of those on site projects, right? So not that they couldn't, but I'm just saying a lot of times they don't do those. So that is where, reading the contours. So for instance, Jeff, like here, I mean, this one was this proposed contour's got a label 133, so that's 133. This is 135. This 132. So this one's actually only, maybe that's like a cut 1 or a cut. No, that one's actually even right there. So it's a fill 1, fill 2. So you do have to look at those and start comparing them. And that's why sometimes, maybe it's highlighting some of those, like I was saying, where you can trace a few out, or if you follow these, you can kind of say, like, there's a 130. It's written, the existing contour is 130. So this one is it's a 3-foot fill here. It's a 4-foot fill there. And you can kind of get the sense, especially around the outer edge, which is where you're probably more important on, especially with some of the neighbors, is trying to getting a sense of, like, what is, how much is that change in topography going to be?
How about, Joe, too, real quickly, these contour lines,
Yep.
they don't go away. They connect. They always go somewhere. So
So you
can't
should
just
be
have 130 and it connects 2 dots and it goes away. It goes all the way around. It connects.
So
always
basically,
connects.
if you look at, so like this is a 134 contour existing, so I'm starting at the 134 contour. And once you come across here, it would go along the island like that, and then it would go like this, and it jumps the curb. So again, the curb is 6 inches roughly is what most curbs are. So if you see this is a 133 contour here, this is 134, right? So halfway in between is where it's going to be 135 and a half on the bottom of the curb. It's 134 at the top of the curb, so that's where the 134 contour is going to jump out, and now it's going to wrap all the way around here. And you're right, Matt, if you were to chase this thing, and I'm not so sure I'm going to get it, but I'm just saying, if you were to chase this all the way around over here someplace, this is 134 here, so it's coming in here. So it's coming around here, then it's coming all the way across over here, then it's coming around over here. And if you tie in right, this is probably a 134 contour right here on this road. But those contours, you should come from an existing contour of the same elevation, and you should be able to chase it all the way around to where it comes back to the next existing condition contour. If you actually then, if you really wanted to look at, if you were to chase the 134, the existing 134, let's just say the existing 134 went around like this, you know, and it came back over here like this. Everything above that would be where you're filling. So if you looked at where the 134 existing contour is, and you chase it to the 134 proposed, every place that you're, and on this particular one, this is a fill site. If it was going the other way, that would be where you're seeing people cut.
Yeah, exactly. And to Jeff's question earlier about where we go out here and we stand here and we say we're standing on 130, grades coming up 3 feet, and it's still going down and draining into these ponds. Those I agree with Jeff. Sometimes it's hard to see that when you're standing. It's hard to visualize. Even when you're standing there to go,
Yeah.
all right, we're going up 3 feet, it's coming here, and then we're still draining down. So we're bringing it up, but we're still draining down. And those are sort of the big picture things that I think, to Jeff's point, helps understand, you know, what's happening out there and how we achieve some of these things, where you've got to build some of this up so you can create these wet ponds so we can then control that water, treat it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the stormwater standards now have made things, I mean, it's good, so don't take me the wrong way. I mean, the stormwater, you know, treatment, the standards that the city has are, you know, they're pretty tight compared to other communities around. But that does pose some other issues because you have to capture and treat all that and get it to a facility to treat it. And so again, that does pose some issues for some, you know, for some projects to do that. Unfortunately, and sometimes it does mean that it creates more fill on some sites because depending on the stormwater BMP that you choose, however you're going to deliver that water, either it be back out onto the ground, or I mean, it's either going to go into the ground or into a closed storm drain system, right? So if it's in the more rural area, it's going to have to get back out into the ground at the ground surface. All of the stormwater BMPs are usually some sort of an impoundment or some filtration system down through the media or whatever. All of that has to happen above your outlet. So if your outlet's on the ground, it's kind of creating, it's making things come up. And so a lot of those things do create, unless you have a site that has some elevation change across it, it does create some issues that way.
Sure.
There are some BMPs that, so like on this, we don't have any on this one, but on the next sheet over we did, there's some, you'll see some that have used the gravel wetlands, like Public Works has a couple gravel wetlands on them, and Samuel Marshall Drive did a gravel wetland on theirs. Those are, they do allow you to, that system stays flooded all the time, so it doesn't need to have, the treatment measure is partially below water, in other words, so it's running through a saturated zone all the time, so that allows the outlet to be higher than the treatment zone, which does help keep the site down a little bit. So the gravel wetland is kind of a nice option for those sites, especially the ones that are challenged that way. That's not a bad place to go.
Sure. How about, real quickly, we've seen a few of these projects come before us recently. Jeff's has asked good questions about them. the pervious pavement. Can
Yeah.
you maybe talk about impervious or pervious pavement for a
Yep.
minute? And
I mean, pervious pavement, it's not my biggest fan. I'll just say that. I mean, the thing about the pervious pavement is that, I mean, all things that filter, eventually, we all have vacuums, right? Vacuums, they clog. Eventually, they need to be cleaned. Pervious pavements are the same thing. I mean, so pervious pavements they're intended to, it's a special pavement mix that's intended to allow water through, which is usually the killer for most pavements, right? So what they have is a lot of free draining material underneath. Some pervious pavements are made to actually infiltrate, like through a section and then infiltrate into the ground. Unfortunately, in Saco, we don't have a lot of great infiltrative soils, so that does happen, but I'm just saying there are some sites that do that, but that's one option. The other one is it goes through the pavement section, goes through the meteor section that's underneath it, and then there'll be underdrains, and then the underdrains will daylight, again, back to the ground or to a storm drain system. Quite honestly, if you're doing pervious pavements, then you're talking about someone who's coming in and vacuuming. There's a vacs, like we have
like a street vacuum.
street vac, but you're vacuuming up to fines, right? When you put those in, you can only imagine when you start to put those in like residential subdivisions where it's homeowners associations that are responsible for those maintenance. Question is are you going to be able to maintain that, and can you maintain that? And when it clogs, then the system is obviously compromised at that point in time. So that's a real challenge.
Can you share a little bit? Because that was one of my thoughts, to get clarification from you. A lot of the larger subdivisions, these treatment methods, they're conveyed to the city, right? We're seeing them being conveyed at acceptance.
Yep.
And you'll have easements so you can get in and maintain them in the future.
Yep.
We haven't had a whole lot of reports as a planning board in my time of how often you're having to do that, or how your budget will possibly be affected by that.
Yeah.
And you just brought up the point that, hey, they're filters, right? They're going to have to be maintained. They're going to have to be redone. I think they did one in the Industrial Park Road
We did.
earlier this year.
Yep.
What does that mean? That's a holistic, or a part of the holistic approach that we need to consider when we're, accepting these subdivisions, is that long-term cost. Because if I understand correctly, the conditions are, there's usually an engineered annual inspection report that's filed with your department, so you're monitoring it, but we haven't seen the cycle getting into effect that, hey, we're making this investment, or it's being invested, and now it's your responsibility to maintain.
Yeah, so I think the city's policy has been, at least since I've been here, has always been that if the city has city water going to a stormwater facility, then we want to take over maintenance of it so that we can make sure it does work. There are a few that we don't, but I mean, for the most part, that's the way that the city has worked. And then on private projects, obviously we don't take those over, and then that's where the developers are responsible for maintaining those. But it's a long-term liability cost for us, for sure. The city, I think we're trying. We try to be a little bit selective about the BMPs that we use. The developers, we follow the state stormwater law, which is that Chapter 500. You'll hear that talked to a bunch of times. So there are certain BMPs that are permissible to use under Chapter 500, and there's probably 15 of them in there. Not talking about proprietary stuff, but like the wet ponds or the filter basins or the gravel wetlands or whatever. There are a few in there, like pervious pavements. That's another one that's allowed. I'm not aware of the city having any pervious pavements that we're taking care of. They've been proposed on a few site projects, so the Hale Trailer proposed a little bit of pervious pavement. The Blaine Street condos, they did some pervious pavement.
Should we have a condition of approval for any project like the Hale Trailer that has pervious pavement that requires some sort of vacuuming or something periodically?
So that is in there, so as part of their stormwater, and again, this is where you guys, whether you read all of this stuff, you know, but in their stormwater management reports, there's also an O&M manual that comes with it. So that's one that'll lay out just a lot of generic kind of stuff, but then it also focuses on the specific BMPs that are being employed at that site. So like on that one where it's pervious pavement, they'll say, okay, the BMP is pervious pavement, now here's the things you need to do. And so vacuum cleaning of those is one of the things that is put in their manual. The tough part is making sure people are doing that, right, and following through with that. That's the big key with the maintenance. Yeah.
My question is how much time is that demanding of your department? So you're getting these annual reports, right, of these inspections.
Right.
And what does that mean ongoing for demands on your department?
I mean, so right now, those come across my desk, right? So, and so essentially when they come in, I read through them, I see if they've got issues, if they need, and most of the people file them, well, the standards have also changed. One of the changes we made to the ordinance a couple years ago, maybe, or a year and a half ago, was about, you may not remember it or not, but it talked about repairing any issues that they see, and they have 60 days now to do that, or contact the city to get an extension of time or whatever. A lot of times what we would see is where you want to talk about time is you would see an annual report that might come in and they would say, you know, I went and inspected it, this was great, this kind of needed a little bit of work, or that could be some work, you know, something could be done here or whatever, submit. And you're kind of like, okay, well, I see you had a couple of issues here, did they get addressed? That's the painful part, because you can be calling people, trying to chase someone down. Did this get followed up on? I need to know that this got addressed or taken care of or whatever. The whole goal now is that the annual report, when it comes in, should actually say, hey, if I found something, that it gets addressed within 60 days. And in theory, that should be reported in that annual report, so that you know you're in good shape, I guess, moving into the next year. It's time. It is time. But right now, at least on most of those, they're private projects, so we're not actually doing like the maintenance part of it. It's more just a paper exercise of making sure that the reports are coming in and that anything that's been identified to be repaired is being taken care of.
But when we see the, you know, not so much maybe the porous pavement, but the chamber systems, there've been a couple, Thornton Academy proposed them.
Yeah.
There again, that's a system that's acceptable, they're opting to use it. You're still reviewing it, but it's still on their property, and it's going to remain private. So there's, you know, some benefits, I guess, right, because it's a private asset. But what happens if that fails, and now we have approved a design that was minimal on space, and they don't have the real estate to create another treatment method?
Well, I mean, all those things can be repaired. They come at, they're at a huge cost, right? Some of those, especially if you built a parking lot on top of it. Now you get not only the cost of repairing the stormwater system, but repairing what you built on top of it. So, again, that's why I'm saying the public works, I think, is where we're fairly selective for, like, to be honest with you, I don't think the city has a chambered system. Underground storage treatment systems like that are not ideal. Are they allowed? Yes. Can I tell somebody, like on a private project, if they come in and that's their BMP of choice, I can't say you can't use that. We may comment about, you know, have you considered other things, or if you have some other options, but a lot of times what you're finding is those are put in sites that obviously are extremely tight. Real estate is precious, right? Especially for someone in the downtown area, and so you just see a lot of those that are going in on those kind of infill tight sites or whatever. If you got the land and you got some space, that's not, and usually it's not. Those are expensive to do, and most of the time people are going to move away from those. And certainly Public Works would not be supportive of if somebody proposed that as on like a subdivision that was coming to the city and said, oh, we're going to put this chamber system in, we would be like, yeah, we're not going to be taking that over. So that would be one where we would probably be saying we're not taking it over. So we do try to keep it to the one, they all require maintenance, they all do. But we do try to keep to the ones that we feel are a little bit more manageable for us, especially ones that either Public Works can do some of the, you know, more mundane stuff, and So the one that you're talking about, I think, Jeff, out on Industrial Park Road that we built, that one there, we ended up, that was an old style, just plain old detention pond that had been overgrown. I think the city built that in the 80s, so it had gone like 30 years. And then we retrofitted it, because that's in the Goose Fair Brook watershed, so it got retrofitted, so that's a gravel wetland now. So we retrofitted that to provide better treatment capacity than it had before. But we did that with Shaw Brothers under a separate contract, so, but it was expensive. I think we spent a couple $100,000 on that, so it was not cheap.
Well, that's good, because you hit upon the, sort of that next question was when would we expect to see sort of things like that? So the chambered system, or when site constraints are tight, or, for example, the pervious pavement. I mean, those systems require quite a bit of maintenance. They're expensive to install, so there are other factors that kind of bring the developers and the engineers to go that direction.
So
right?
like the pervious pavement one, and again, not to pick on like a particular project, but I mean, one of the things that, so like the Blaine Street one, I mean, that's an allowable BMP. The original design, it's porous pavement. And again, a lot of times what you'll do is, it's not designed to like take water that way, but there'll be a catch, all of these usually have a catch basin someplace that, like, if the thing ever just gets inundated under a very, because a pervious pavement can only take so much water, right? I mean, they can take a lot of water, but still there's going to be a large storm that's going to come in, or a high intensity storm, and it's going to pond up, and usually there'll be a catch basin someplace that'll be like, okay, now the water's getting out. So the way that one was set up was they had a catch basin, so it was not designed to carry water all the time, but only like an intense thing. But that was going to that's connected to the city storm drain system in Roebuck Street, Roebuck Ave. No problem, and that's fine. But we commented that we wanted to see, so and I would say generally that wasn't a problem, but we commented by saying, no, we don't want to see that. We want to see you get that out, daylight it to the surrounding wetland areas. And the reason for that was because if that doesn't get maintained, if the porous pavement doesn't get maintained, then that catch basin, instead of it being just once in a while, it's going to become every day. And then it'll be all the time. And then all of a sudden we have really no control over any of the stormwater on that site. It's all coming to the city. And so we wanted to say, no, you need to handle it on your site. Don't connect to us. So we are pretty protective of our systems that way. So you may not know why we're saying those things, but that's some of what we're thinking in the background. And again, I think the homeowners associations on some of them are really good, and there's others that, they're hard. They're hard to get a hold of. They're hard to, get focused on some things.
Well, yeah, that's always the big picture, I think, for us, is to make sure we protect the city. We try to not put all the burden on the city, but we know the reality of some of these, even though it's written on paper, it still has to be executed.
Right.
So that's the piece that we always, it seems that's where a lot of the conversations revolve around is, how does this protect the city? How are we okay? And we like to understand, but it sort of comes down to, if you're asking for something, we like to say, or we like to understand why, but
Right.
I don't think we ever say, nah, don't do what Joe said.
Right.
Do something else.
So, I mean, I will say that, so, again, when we talked about the pond that was out on Industrial Park Road, that was a detention pond, just a plain old detention pond, the old school kind of thing. Stormwater standards changed over a while, and then you started to see things like the wet ponds come in, and then you start to see the under-drain soil filter basins come in. They are reworking Chapter 500 again. I don't think those BMPs are going to change drastically, but there is definitely going to be some little tweaks made to Chapter 500 that will affect some of those BMPs. So you might see some other things start to show up in the toolbox. They're trying to be a little bit more prescriptive. So when we talked about, like, there's all these BMPs and people can kind of pick and choose whatever they want in Chapter 500. There are certain ones that do a much better job at certain things, certain pollutants, say, or whatever. And so the DEP, one of the things that they're looking to change or be a little bit more prescriptive on is, like, if there's a known stressor in your watershed, then these are the BMPs, so they're gonna try to narrow them down so that they can't just choose whatever they want.
Yeah.
I think that's a move in the right direction for sure. Then there's a bunch of the ones that you see that, when I said they're proprietary, they're things like the filterers, the ones, there's a few people that have come in with the jellyfish system.
Yeah, we've seen that one recently, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, I won't have to worry about it, but hopefully it'd be a dark day when the city takes over one of those. I mean, because those are just, they're a money pit is what they are. So, I mean, they do their job,
Yeah.
but they only do their job if you maintain them and you replace the cartridges in them a lot. And, I mean, again, it'll be interesting to see when the developer, I assume they know what they're getting, but I'm not so sure they know what they're paying for sometimes. And
Yeah.
that's where the city, like, we would be like, yeah, no, no way we're gonna take one of those.
Yeah, because there's a few of them, and this is a good conversation, because there's the laydown yard in Industrial Park that has no pavement. It had a
Yep.
gravel wet pond.
Yep.
They were fixing and expanding a little bit, and we went on to a site visit, and we're like, it's all dirt and gravel, and we've got a gravel wet pond, so where we don't do it every day, we're sort of like, what, how is this okay? And we talked with them, and I think they came back and they did I think they put some reclaimed asphalt down, I think, in some of the areas to help.
Yeah, well, the other thing about
Restabilize, but-
Yeah, the other thing about the BMPs is they are a challenge to build today too, especially work your way out of those sites, because usually the water is, I mean, the stormwater facilities are at the end, right? They're at the bottom of the site. So a lot of times, some of those, depending on how the contractors go at them, sometimes they're built and they're just roughed in, and they kind of serve as a sediment basin during construction. Other times they'll actually try to complete, like, essentially the entire thing, and then put more protections in front of them. And then, quite honestly, that top layer, you can peel some of that back off and then replenish it. So sometimes it ends up being sacrificial, depending on how they want to go at their project. But some of those things, they just, at the end, they have to be built so that you know that it's right when they're done. And so sometimes it's just how they want to go at them.
Yeah.
I have a question. I think one of the previous presentations you had done a couple of years back, we were talking about impaired streams, right? And kind of playing into these best treatment practices. It doesn't feel like those impaired streams, do they have a different setback that are showing up on the plans? Because it doesn't feel like I've ever had a plan saying, yes, this is an impaired stream, and we're being extra cautious of the setback. You always see the limit of development, and they're trying to fit as much stuff on that parcel as possible. And how are we to do our role? Because that presentation was pretty in depth, and federal monies or state monies are available to help the city try to mitigate some of those. And where does our role come in trying to help you hold that line?
So I think you folks and planning have been pretty good about, so like on here, when you see these setbacks, Jeff, so streams, this is a 75-foot setback, and that's a 100-foot setback. And the 75-foot setback is the NERPA standard that you know, for a stream. Anything within 75 feet of the resource requires some level of permitting. IF&W, if it's a real stream, like in this one, this is, I mean, that's Sandy Brook, IF&W will, on larger projects like this, when you go to the DEP, so you know how the city has delegated authority for the site law projects, you guys see those. I mean, your review seems the same, but you're actually issuing a different permit on those. If a developer goes or an applicant goes to the DEP, one of the sections that gets looked at is wetlands, buffers, whatever. There will be a standard comment from IF&W that their recommendation is for a 100-foot setback to the streams. So, but statutorily, 75 feet is what it has to be for the NERPA. We've been pretty good about asking developers to honor that 75 foot at a minimum, or where we can get the 100. and we're asking them to stay out of those areas, and we're asking those things to be put in buffers, like the deed protected conservation easements. Emily's been very good about saying, like on subdivisions, if you can, I mean, again, sometimes it's really hard on lots, but she likes to try to get the lots so that they don't even include those buffer zones, that they're actually not even on someone's land, that's part of the open space lots. I think those things are great. That's another one that you're going to see through the rewrite of Chapter 500. I don't know if they'll be successful getting all that through, but we were also talking about like the LID stuff that's coming down the road on the low impact development. I think you guys heard a little bit of that a little while ago. The stream corridors are one of the areas right now that they're really trying to get to where people stay out of those. So I think those are, if there's a message to be taken for that from the planning board, it's really scrutinize people's, I mean, if we do anything, it's stay out of those stream corridors.
We did do a 100-foot setback for Innis Landing. I know that was one that was marked.
It was, I mean, there was, because we do, that is one of the things that we're asking for right up front is for people to show those 75-foot setbacks and hundreds, and if we can get the 100, we're trying to get them. Right now, the only issue is that there really isn't any strong language in our ordinance that says, like, you can't do this. So it's more of a request right now. We try to say, hey, we need you to stay out of these areas, or we really want to try to protect these areas. Maybe someday we can get some stronger language to that. Obviously, if it's shoreland zoning, then that's different, but our shoreland zoning doesn't go up every first or second order stream. So, but I would say if that's so, but there is not a different setback in the urban impaired stream. It's the same thing.
So I guess if it's the same thing, I don't know if we can kind of make a request of planning staff. I would think it'd be very beneficial if they have a plan review in your early conceptual team meetings with the developers. I think it'd be important to note that it is listed as an impaired stream. It should show right up and say very clearly for us to be extra flag, hey, this is listed as an impaired
stream. Yeah,
because
what you will see, usually that's one of the early memos. When I send out one of my first memos, or if we have our PDRC meetings with the developers, those are some of the things that we're flagging from right up front. Is, this is an urban impaired stream, so you need to meet the urban impaired stream standard. That's one thing that the city ordinance also does, is when I talked about the city's kind of stormwater standards being a lot tighter than a lot of communities. Most projects, so it's an urban impaired stream. The urban impaired stream standard is a higher level of treatment than you do any other place, right? In the city. It's like treating it a second time almost, in a sense. Most communities, while they may have an urban impaired stream, unless you're a project, so you know how a site law project for you guys, most of the time that's a development that has more than 3 acres of impervious area. So it's a large project. It's not going to be a small little, gas station, corner store, or something like that. So if you're going to the DP for a site law permit, that's when the urban impaired stream standard normally trips in this state. On Saco's ordinance, we said, no. We're going to require the urban impaired stream standard if you're over 10,000 square feet of new or redevelopment. So we're requiring people to deal with the urban impaired stream standard at a much, much lower threshold than others are. Sometimes all that really means, unfortunately, again, so the urban impaired stream standard is where they have to do all the stormwater treatment they normally would do in their site, and then they're supposed to treat either additional off-site area or other things that they can to try to provide an added treatment level. If they can't do that, that's where you'll see people pay into that, the CFUP plan that we have. So that's money that comes to the city, which is great, but we have to find projects to spend that on. So that's one of the things we use to build that gravel wetland on Industrial Park Road. But you'll see people that'll come in, and some of our comments when we'll say, like they might be quick to say, hey, we're willing to pay into the CFUP plan, and I'll be like, well, you've got opportunities. You could do other things on your site. We'd rather see you do those things before you we don't have to just jump to the CFUP plan. We'll get there sometimes if we have to, but we try to encourage them to do everything they can on their site before we go to the CFUP plan. So that's the compensation fee utilization plan. We like our acronyms, yeah. So. Yeah, so, I mean, really, so the city had to set that up. So again, if you're an urban impaired stream, you're a municipality, there are a few others that can get it, like lake watershed groups, associations, or whatever, but the city of Saco put one together. So what that means is if a developer can't meet the urban impaired stream standard, then there's a fee that they pay that comes to the city, and then we get to find projects to do. If you don't have a CFUP plan, then that option's not available for the developer. So it's really, some would say, maybe we shouldn't have one, because it forced the developers, but sometimes it's just, there's no way for the developers to deal with that. You can treat your own site. It's hard to get treatment off-site. They're either trying to negotiate with somebody to get an easement to put a stormwater facility on, who's going to maintain this thing, all those things come up, and it just makes it hard for development to move forward sometimes. So I'm sure there was a discussion with the city at the time when they did it, but that was kind of the middle ground. So, we've had a number of projects that, well, Public Works paid into it. When we built Public Works is on the edge of the Goosefair Brook watershed. So when that facility went in, we treated everything that was for our new development, but there's nothing else in there for us to treat. So we ended up having to pay into the CFUP plan as part of that. So.
Well, good, great. I guess being mindful of time and
Yep.
turning saucer here, I think.
Yeah, I'll leave you guys. So what I would say, Matt, or any of the plan board, if there's other things that you want to cover another time, just let me know or let Emily know, and happy to come in.
Yeah, that's good. We appreciate it. I think this sort of big picture hopefully helped some board members, gave some more info.
I just wanted to take a second to thank you, Joe, for all of your, this evening and other presentations, but weekly, our packets. I think you do a phenomenal job in your memos to both staff, to us. Very detailed, extremely professional in your field, but also giving applicants options and pointing out things that should be brought to our attention, maybe very specific conditions of approval that look at protecting the city's interests. And I think you've been a huge, huge value to our community. I'm very thankful for all that you've done. Sorry to hear that you might be deciding to
September.
at some point. I'm hoping. I'm hoping. Well, if it's decided, well, maybe we can convince them. Sugar them up a
Well,
little bit.
you'll get
but
to meet Adam, so we have a replacement.
yes.
So Adam was a little under the weather, so he didn't want to spread the wealth with you guys, but he'll come in.
But I just wanted to take a moment to truly thank you. I really, your documents are kind of partially my language. I like it, but it was just so thoughtful and so encompassing. It's a great summary. So thank you for all the work you've done for the community.
Yep, no worries, appreciate it.
Yeah, great.
You always have the largest set of comments on it.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you again for Joe Laverrier to come in and help us with that. That was great. We'll move on to our next item, and this is our annual planning board training, and we have a presentation maybe, or we have some, I guess, Attorney Phil Soffizier is here to help us out here. Thank you, Phil, for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you guys again. Sorry, that's a little bit loud. I think there's a few returning members, 3 maybe?
We might have most of us
From last
here
year?
from last year, maybe.
Okay, I'll try not to be.
This is
It's a little duplicative, but I'm
Yeah.
always happy to answer
yeah,
questions.
no, this is good. We have Miss
Yeah.
White this is her first meeting with us.
Nice to meet you.
She was just confirmed last night, so it's great to have her here
Good.
and join us.
Okay. Well, some of this is duplicative, and I don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but it's good as a refresher. And just like last year, I'm always happy to interrupt me and ask questions. That's sort of where I feel like it's a little more useful. The first thing I will do, and this is a little, I'm going to go somewhat quickly through it, but I put everything in the slide for you on FOA. The reason why, because you're required to have Freedom of Access Act training as a planning board member. That was added a few years ago to the statute. Before that, it was, elected officials typically, clerks, city managers, CEOs, and they've added planning board members. So but not zoning board members. It's kind of random. They tweak the law from time to time. I'm sure zoning board members will have to. It's good for everyone to know what it is, but you actually are required to have it. So I'm just going to go. I'm going to start by going through freedom of access. Again, some of this is not necessarily relevant to your day-to-day, but it's good for you to understand, I think. And it will qualify as your training under the state law. So I don't know if I'm in charge of that or not. Am I in charge of that? Okay, I'll just keep talking. You'll see some of the slides are fairly quick, but the freedom of access law is Maine's sunshine law, if you will. It's at the federal level called the Freedom of Information Act. So you'll sometimes see FOIA, or people will call it FOIA, but in Maine we call it FOA. So you'll see FOAA, that's what we call it. But it's the main version of the Freedom of Access Act. And the purpose of that act is, in essence, and this comes from the sort of introductory language, is to remind everyone and sort of the intent of the legislatures that the actions we take as government officials, and you are government officials for the city of Saco, that they should be open to the public and open for inspection. And that your deliberations, most importantly, should be conducted openly. And I'm going to get into a little of that when I talk about sort of boardsmanship issues and things like that. And if ever challenged in a court, the law would be applied liberally and to promote its underlying purposes and policies. That means you're going to sort of err on the side of openness. So if there's ever a question about whether a document is public, and it's in a gray area, the court will likely construe it to be public. Same thing for open meetings. Again, that you will likely not have a lot of executive sessions, I'll get into that, but sometimes your meetings can be confidential, but it's limited circumstances. So next slide is that the law really covers 2 areas, and I'm going to go over both those areas: public meetings and proceedings, so public meetings, and public documents, or public records. So what are public meetings? It's defined as the transaction of any functions affecting any and all citizens of the state by any of the following. And I pulled out the one that applies to you: any board, commission, agency, authority of any municipality. So essentially any body within the city of Saco. And you are one of them. So it's the bodies you see, authorities, commissions. It's not the staff, so in terms of the meetings. So that's why staff can have meetings. The public's not always invited to them. It's the public bodies that you're doing the work of the public openly. The next slide shows that your meetings are open to the public unless otherwise provided for under the executive session statute. All of your meetings are public. Most of you know that, but it's good to remind people. So people can walk in, as you know, right now and watch what we're doing. It's open to the public. They can listen to us. They can watch it. So that except otherwise provided by statute is or 405. 405 is the executive session statute, and I'll briefly review that in a moment. Or there are certain statutory exceptions to open meetings. Almost none of them, again, will apply to planning boards. But one example is like a poverty abatement. That is something that's called out by law, that if someone files for a poverty abatement, that can be made in an executive session with the council in this case. So this is something that the next slide that does come across, you'll come across this in your work, is communications outside of a public meeting. So you're not prohibited from communicating outside of public proceedings unless the purpose is to defeat the purpose of the purposes of FOA. What that means is that if you're really doing governmental business outside of a meeting, you're defeating that purpose. You can still talk about things like quorums and agendas and information sharing, but you really shouldn't be engaged in substantive discussions over email, particularly with 3 or more. In your case, because you're an adjudicatory body, I would say really never. Should you get into substantive discussions on email. You can ask for information from staff, and it's typically a one-way kind of communication. Thank you. And you're allowed to again see who's going to be there, quorum purposes, and things like that. It's every kind of communication tool that you're subject to. So that's personal and official email accounts, Facebook, Twitter, email communications, and so common violations are if members are talking about how they're going to vote, sharing information that maybe other members don't have, or even members do have, but you're not letting the public or the applicant see that information. Those are some of the common violations of the meeting provisions. You'll almost likely never have a meeting, an official meeting like this that would not be noticed because you have very good professional staff, first of all, who would take care of that kind of thing. Sometimes that can slip through the cracks in certain places, but I can't imagine that would ever happen here. There needs to be a record of your meeting. So you'll hear about minutes. You're technically not required to have minutes by law. You have to have a record. And that's a very simple requirement. What it says is you need to have at a minimum the date, time, and place of your meeting, the members of the body holding the public meeting, recorded as either absent or present, and all motions and votes taken by individual members if there's a roll call. That's the minimum requirements you need, but it can actually be satisfied through recordings. So if this is taped or recorded, that actually would qualify for FOA purposes of that notice. Of that record. That's so obviously people can understand who didn't attend, at least that basic information. What happened with this body? The public has the right to attend, as I just mentioned, and they can also record it. So you may see sometimes people will show up with cameras or recording devices, and they're allowed to do that, whether it's a member of the public, member of the media, whoever it wants to. The only prohibition is that they can't interfere with your business. So you can have some reasonable regulations about maybe where someone's standing or something like that, so they don't interfere, but they're allowed to come in and record you. Executive sessions, again, I'm going to very quickly, you're only allowed to go to executive session under one of the statutory provisions in section 405 of that law. And I'm going to go very quickly through these because some of them don't apply to you. One is essentially labor and employment matters, which you will most likely not have. The only time that could potentially come up is if there's a matter with one of your members. It's rare, but if you're discussing about because that employment provision also deals with public officials and appointees. So if there was ever any kind of employment issue with one of you, maybe there would be an executive session on that. But you don't have your own employees, so that's usually for the council to have. Certain school board expulsions and suspensions of public school students, the use or acquisition of public property. So the council can go into executive session, they want to buy or sell property on behalf of the city so that you don't, obviously, because there may be negotiations, you don't want to give away your bargaining power. Labor contracts, you don't have those, obviously. E is the one that you may every once in a while, which is essentially consultations with your attorney. And the only time really I see that with planning boards are if there's some sort of threat of litigation around what you're reviewing and you may need some legal advice that shouldn't be just given in public, then we'll have an executive session. Or if we have a case that goes up to the court, it's been appealed, and there may be a remand back to you, sometimes I'm asked to go in an executive session with the board to give them sort of some background on what they're being asked to do. So that's the one time. You do need your attorney present under that provision, so you can't just go talk about, and I do see this one misunderstood quite often. You can't just talk about legal issues among yourselves. This one specifically says with your attorney. But even when, I will say, even when I'm asked to, when I'm representing a planning board, you still often want to have some public discussion of even what I'm talking to you about, because the public generally has a right to know what you're doing. So I will give certain legal advice that to guide you maybe in a decision, you know, in terms of what the law says. But then sometimes I say some of the same thing out in public, so the public understands the same advice you got. Obviously, there's some nuances there, but I think it's always important for the public to understand how you're making your decisions.
So Phil,
Yeah.
this is sort of an item where the board, I think, has had a little bit of experience. We haven't gone into an executive session, but we have asked for opinion on multiple occasions for particular projects to help give direction and recommendations and advice. So I think but I guess that's not really a requirement to go into executive session, but a tool if necessary, per se.
That's right. And you see there's sort of a lot of language here in this E, but one of the reasons why you would want to consult with your attorney is not just that you're getting legal advice. Some of that is given publicly, as you know, in planning boards, but it's when that information you'll see, sort of put the municipality at a substantial disadvantage. So you think about like really being in a law school, maybe we're talking about litigation strategy. Again, probably not necessarily a lot with a planning board, but that's the kind of thing you wouldn't want to discuss, certain strategies on defending something, for example.
Sure.
But as a public sector attorney, we do have some attorney-client privilege with our clients, or our clients, I should say, have some attorney-client privilege with the advice we give. But we have, it's not as strong as it is in the private sector. So that's why you'll see oftentimes we'll write a memo to you for legal advice, and it's actually right in the packet.
Right.
Right, so that people can see what we're advising you, unlike your private attorney, which you would keep private among yourself and you wouldn't share that likely. So it is a little bit of a different kind of relationship we have in our public sector clients.
Sure.
So a general reason, if you're having a discussion about certain records that are considered confidential somewhere else in the main statutes. This last one is if a code officer is going to bring a enforcement matter. Sometimes code officers are actually are certified to bring cases in court in certain circumstances. So that's what that is. It's to talk about sort of an 80K enforcement action. So those are the reasons. But again, it's probably limited that you would have an executive session, and if you do, it would be under the legal consultation provision. If you do go into executive session, so the restrictions are you can't vote in executive session. It takes 3/5 of the members to go into executive session by motion, but then you can discuss an issue, but you can't vote. You have to, any vote you take, you have to come back out of executive session and vote publicly. Again, that's so the public understands what action you took. If it really is very sensitive and confidential, what will typically happen, you'll have a conversation. In executive session, you come out and there may be very little discussion in public, but you will have at least voted so people can see how you're voting on the issue. You're also limited to talking about the issues that you went into executive session for. So that can sometimes be a common violation, which is like, we went into executive session, say, to talk about a certain employee matter, and then it becomes a free-for-all discussion of all the stuff you really want to talk about, but you didn't, but you out in public, but now you're in executive session. You can't do that. You're going in for a particular purpose, and that purpose has to be allowed by the statute. So that can be sometimes a common violation. It's easy as human beings to try to veer into other conversations, but you have to limit it for the reason why you're in that executive session. If you have more than one reason, you can say more than one reason, but you just have to keep it limited. The next slide is there's got to be notice of your meetings. You do that. FOA only requires what we call sort of ample notice in a reasonable amount of time. That's the only statutory requirement. Many municipalities adds in some specific requirements in your ordinances. So sometimes 7 days, newspaper, maybe not the newspaper. Sometimes, there's different local requirements, but at a minimum, FOA requires ample time to allow the public to attend in a reasonable manner, in a reasonable amount of time. You can have an emergency meeting under FOA, so if you wouldn't be able to meet that, and you had to somehow meet, and again, mostly it's councils, but not always, you could have a quick meeting tonight, the next day or that night. You have to get together. And the law just requires you to notify the local media as quickly as possible, or is it the same time? And you would just post it as quickly as possible, let people know. But you are allowed to do that. And I'm going to get into this next one a little bit more when we talk about the general planning board duties. But FOA does require you to have written decisions. as it relates to conditional approvals or denials. I will say, under Maine law, sort of case law, you also have to have written decisions for your approvals, and also often by your own ordinances. The reason behind that is so that people can understand, again, your decision, and applicants or opponents can decide if or why they want to appeal. You're putting out your rationale so people understand, why did we make that decision, and do I agree with it? Remote meeting participation policy, I actually don't know. I assume Saco has one. I don't know that for sure.
It's something that's, I believe it went before council last night for discussion.
Okay.
So it is something that we're going to be discussing as a board here in the very near future. So,
Okay.
yeah, I think relevant.
So it's relevant. So
Yeah.
as just a bit of background, this came out of COVID. Before COVID, boards were not allowed to meet remotely, explicitly. There were a few exceptions in Maine law, particularly for some of these boards, state boards that had remote, like I can think of FAME, and I can think of the Loring Redevelopment Authority, certain boards that were called out, and maybe it was difficult to get members because of geographic reasons. But otherwise, boards were prohibited. COVID changed those rules. Originally was sort of an emergency provision. It became a law that allowed you to meet for emergency purposes or other limited purposes, and now that's been amended over the time that essentially you can meet for remote purposes for almost any reason, but you have to have a policy at your city level outlining the sort of provisions on how you can do that. If a board member meets and you have a policy and a board member participates remotely, you have to allow the public to participate in that same method. So that's one of those requirements. So if you're one of the board members on Zoom, then you have to let the public by Zoom. It's one of the changes just last year. And what it does allow you, by the way, just to finish my thought on that, is now that we allowed remote meetings, if you're having a remote meeting, the person online can vote. They count for quorum purposes, they count for voting purposes. That had to be in the law because, again, that was not the law before. It was the exact opposite, in fact. You couldn't count somebody remote as for quorum, but now you can. You have to allow all your materials that people are in the room have for the people online. So that's the other requirement. One of the changes just this past year is before, everybody had to have their own, every board had to have their own policy if you're going to do it. And that raised some questions for some towns that wanted unified policies or have one at the council level that applied to everybody. Excuse me. So the law was changed just this past year, I want to say that if a municipality passes it at their council level, that does apply to all the boards in town unless they explicitly allow one of their boards to pass their own policy.
So that, I believe that, maybe Shannon or someone knows other, but I believe that's how it's been presented and how council's written it, that it's up to each board.
Okay.
It would be up to our board if that's something that we want to participate in or adopt.
Okay, that's good to know. That's what the law allows. In many municipalities, it was sort of the opposite. So you had all these different types of policies that were sort of sometimes inconsistent among boards, and so there was an opportunity to have, no, we want one policy and here's how it works for everybody. But it did allow that sort of, if you will, opt-out to allow if the municipality does think that each board should have its own policy. So it sounds like that's the direction you're moving in. The next slide, I'm going to move right into public records. So that was the public meeting side of FOA. Public records, again, you err on the side of public, so basically everything in front of you right now, someone could ask for a copy of, it applies to anything, any kind of medium, so not only paper, but graphic and mechanical and electronic. So basically, it's mostly data today. We don't see as much paper. That's in the possession of a government official, which is you are one of them. And it's received, prepared, or containing information related to the transaction of public business. So those are the three tests to see if it's a public document. So in other words, just because you're a public official and it's an email doesn't mean a member of the public gets to have it. They get to have it if it's also dealing with the governmental business that you're working in. So your personal emails are not subject to disclosure, things like that. Again, just like on the meeting side, there are some exceptions. So the exceptions on the meeting side are executive sessions. The exceptions on the document side are a list of various exceptions that the legislature had said, these are not public records. And there's a list of them. It's also, we actually in Maine still do not have a good comprehensive list of them. The legislature has a website that lists some of them, but what the legislature has done is in FOA there's a list, but then they've added exceptions throughout all the main titles. So it can sometimes be complicated on what's accepted. These are the common exceptions. So again, the first one's a catch-all, records that have been deemed confidential by statute. So you have to know basically where those fall within all the statutes, and that's why sometimes you'll consult your, or I should say the staff will sometimes consult the city attorney on that, the city solicitor. There are certain exceptions for personnel records, certain TIF submissions, forest management plans, poverty abatements, things like that, juvenile records investigations, medical information, things like that. The one that I would say you may get, planning boards have very few, I can think that, but there's one that comes to zoning boards specifically that was added, which are for disability variances. Because disability variances sometimes require you to give medical records to prove that you actually fit a disability to get the exception, to get the variance. And so the legislature, that's an example of adding that in, saying, well, you don't get, someone can't FOA that medical record, for example. But for your purposes, you should just assume that almost everything you have is going to be public. Who can make a FOA request? Anyone. That's the short answer. It can be a person, it can be a corporation. They don't have to say why they're doing it. We can't demand that they tell us why they want it. It does not have to be in writing or on a form, but a lot of municipalities ask nicely for people to put on a form. But if someone really demands it, we have to process that request. The town, again, you won't have this, but this is so you know what happens if it comes in. Someone wants to know, I want all the records about this particular application the planning board has, including all communications that you'll see that. Any communications between the members of the, or anyone else related to this particular application, right? That's what you'll get. And so you have you have someone called a public access officer in town. Every municipality has to have one. Sometimes it's the clerk, sometimes it's the city manager, sometimes it's another official. And their job is to kind of be the point person, and they would likely reach out to you, let them know those requests so you can look through your own personal papers that you may have. Some towns nowadays actually, if you're using city emails, they just do it themselves. They use the IT and they say, do a search in these databases and pull it out. But others, it's still a manual process. You've got to go through and look through all of your emails. The city has to acknowledge that request within 5 days. They then have to give an estimate to that requester within a reasonable amount of time. That includes both the amount of time it's going to take to get back to that person and the cost associated with that. And if it's over a certain amount, and the cost, the city can charge $25 an hour after the first 2 hours of time that it takes to collate this, which still doesn't fully, obviously, reimburse the city for its expenses, but it does help. If it's over $50, we have to notify the requester before proceeding. If it's over $100, you can actually say, we're not going to do it unless you pay in advance. And that was in response to some sort of multiple requests like that and not getting paid. Yeah.
So Phil, just going back a couple slides, I was just thinking, you were mentioning, so let's imagine a request comes in on a particular project, and each of the member of the planning board, we've all made notes, our own notes, to be ready for the meeting. Yep. And ask questions. Our personal notes, would be something that could be requested and
yes.
we have to turn over?
Yes.
So my second question then is, at least the way I've been doing it is, as projects come up, I keep my notes, but when the project's approved, I literally toss them. Yeah. Because it's like the deal's done. Is that something we should be keeping all of our notes, and for how long?
That's a good question. I get asked that a lot, and honestly, it's not a great answer, but I will give you what I've sort of come up with. So the Maine State Archives is actually the agency that publishes what we call the retention record. So it's a different agency, and they publish the different schedules of retention, and one of them is for municipalities. It's interesting if you just Google it and find those. It's got, on one hand, extremely specific, and on the other hand, not specific at all. So it will say, you guys have probably seen it. So they'll say like site plans that are approved, official that are signed, it says forever, I want to say. Applications after a certain period of time can be tossed. Certain are 6 years, for example. The best I could find for notes, it's not particularly clear about notes, is that at a minimum, they should be kept for at least during the appeal period, so 30 days, in the event that there may be an appeal. If it's beyond that period, there's no appeal, it's essentially just your sort of thoughts about something, it most likely can be destroyed. Some towns, however, I know they have staff collect all notes. I don't know what the staff does with it after that. They probably put a folder and have a disposal process at a certain period of time. I was on a zoning board once myself, and at the end of the meeting, the staff member would go by and just pick up everyone's notes and put it into some pile. And actually, I liked that because then I didn't have to think about it, you know. So that's another way of doing it.
But the safe answer is that on any application, we approve or deny.
Right.
We should hang on to our notes for at least 30 days.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Just in case someone requests it. I would argue, if I was defending you, that may or may not really be part of the record, but that's something for the attorneys to argue about. But an attorney may seek to find those and maybe use them for some purpose. So I'm going to keep moving. So violations of FOA, in other words, if you purposely don't hand over a document, or you have a meeting that was not noticed properly, a board could find that the action of the board was null and void if it was a illegal meeting, quote unquote, meaning it could void any ordinances, orders, rules, decisions, in your case, contracts, anything that was voted on in a way that was at an illegal meeting. There could be subject to penalties and attorney's fees and a fine of $500. So you don't see a lot of these cases, but they do come up from time to time. There's been a couple publicized cases in the last couple of years. So it's important to be mindful of these rules and to follow these rules. And honestly, it's just an important part of to ensuring that the public trusts what you're doing too. So you really should be mindful. I only have two more slides, I think. I mentioned public access officers. I just wanted to point that out, that every municipality has one. And again, their job is to be the FOA contact and really to collate responses and things like that and respond to requesters. The state has a public access ombudsman at the Attorney General's office. It's an assistant attorney general, and her job is to be the ombudsman if there's questions. I've talked to her on a number of occasions. If members of the public or municipalities have questions, that's her role to help. They also have a FAQ online, which is helpful. And in fact, that qualifies as your training if you can't have one live, if you review that FAQ. So that was added by statute about 10 years ago or so. And then finally, and this is the last thing I want to mention, and it's the conclusion of this part of your training, is that you're required to get training. You just had it. If you, within 120 days after seeking office, and so it should be noted in the record. There is a certificate if you want to use it. I think I brought one last year. I don't know if you keep them or not, but if you go to the FOA Ombudsman's website, main FOA Ombudsman's website, there's a template. It's probably enough to note for the record somewhere in the minutes or something that this happened, but I have had one town where where someone requested copies of proof certificates that people had their training. And so ever since I've seen that, I often say it should note it somehow for the official record in case it's ever in question. Any questions on FOA? Okay. The next slide is the second topic I want to talk about tonight, which is I want to go over the main law on conflicts of interest. And you'll see that there's various sort of subtopics that we talk about when we talk about conflicts of interest. One's a financial conflict of interest. There's incompatibility of office, which I'm not going to get into a lot tonight. There's prohibited appointments or employment, relationships, and predisposition or bias. So a financial conflict of interest is essentially if you act in your own financial interest as it relates to your official business. Pecuniary interest is the common law phrase, and you see it pulled over into the statutes. So I just point this out, there is some common law on it, but if you go to the next page, what we now use is the statutory law. So there's a municipal statute on point. When people talk about a conflict of interest, this is what we look at first as municipal attorneys when we're advising boards. So it's Title 30A, MRS 2605. This is the black letter law. when it's presumed that you're acting in a self-interested way. And in short, it's a 10% financial interest rule. So it's if you have at least 10% ownership in a company that's appearing before you, and you're an officer, director, partner, associate, stockholder of that entity. That's essentially a de facto conflict of interest, and you should recuse yourself, because it could have some evidence of self-dealing if there's some company that you own is looking for an approval for something, right? It makes sense. But it's called the 10% rule. What's a little bit more gray, and I actually don't have the specific language, but on the next sentence, you'll see in that same statute, it also says municipal officials should attempt to avoid the appearance of a conflict of interest. That's a little bit harder to say. It's not a de facto rule. And what it means to avoid the appearance of a conflict of interest is that that there's some suggestion that maybe you have a conflict that doesn't necessarily meet that 10% test, but you had some dealings with that company or some relationship with that company or that individual. What that rule says, you don't have to necessarily step down, but you should at least disclose it and have a discussion among your fellow board members, and then have a vote to determine whether that person can continue to sit, right? And what that board member should ask themselves is, if there's an appearance of a conflict, is can you still sit in this application without predisposition or bias, right? That you're not going to be biased in any way. And honestly, only you can really answer that question for yourself, but it's something you should be thinking about.
Mr. Sasser, if
Yeah.
I may, can I just clarify? I mean, I think we've been very good as a board, at least in the last year or two, about disclosing and discussing. But you did say vote, and does that vote need to be like a formal polling by the chairman, or can it be more of a visual nod? We've all kind of yes, and the chairman will usually say it appears there's no conflict. Let's move on. Would we be much better off to actually do a formal poll?
You would be better off, and honestly, particularly if there is an application where there's a lot of attention on it, there's a chance of appeal, you're going to want that in the record. So, when you're nodding, everyone really knows what that means. Everyone's in agreement, or someone would step up. So, but if there's a potential where we want to see it in a record somewhere, right? Like so someone appealed, and one other basis for appeal is that there was a conflict. What would be helpful if I'm representing the city is that, well, they did disclose that, they had a discussion, and look, there's the vote where they all voted. So I think it is the better practice, I'll put it to you that way. I know that it doesn't always happen, but what I recommend is disclose, discuss, and vote. And it can go fairly quickly, right? So same thing, but you sort of show, someone would say, I have a motion that there is no conflict, we allow, Mr. Brochu to sit, and you have a discussion.
So to follow up on that, the timing of when to disclose that, I imagine if an application is coming before us, and Matt as the chair, announces it, and before anybody speaks, it would seem to me that would be the time for one of the members to say, Mr. Chairman, just a point here, it may appear that I have a conflict of interest, and I explain it, people can discuss it, we can vote on it.
I agree. Yeah.
And then move forward. So
Right.
it would be like right at the very beginning, before anyone starts discussing anything.
That's right, right, but at the beginning, either at the beginning of the meeting, like if you already know ahead of time, you could do it right at the beginning of the meeting, or at a minimum, right at the beginning of that particular agenda item, before you start discussing any of so right after and now we're moving to this particular item, any conflicts. Some boards, and I don't know if it's always necessary, some boards ask that routinely, it's part of their sort of script, if you will. So you bring it up, and then the first question is, are there any conflicts or any disclosures that need to occur before we move on?
Yeah, and I think that is something I think the board's been doing a very good job on. We've been pretty diligent about that. I believe in our notes, while we haven't been taking a formal vote, we have definitely been disclosing it, discussing it, and acknowledging.
It would appear in the record at least.
Yeah, it does appear in our records that we did have a discussion, that we were in agreement that there wasn't a conflict of interest, and we typically ask the applicant as well if their position on it as well, and then move forward. So I'm not opposed to a formal vote as well, but as you just mentioned, and to follow up with Jim, that is something that I want to add into our sort of my typical opening of it is adding a comment there, just like you said. Is there any disclosures or any conflicts that we need to discuss.
I think
That
it's
way,
pretty good practice.
yeah, that way.
You remind people. Some people might not remember, or, you know, just.
Exactly.
It occurred
Yeah.
to them, so. So yeah, so those are the questions you need to ask yourself, and that's the process you should. So the next, I think I'm getting ahead of myself, but I just said that: disclose, discuss, and vote. Again, one of the consequences if a court does find there was a conflict and you did not step down is that your action could be potentially voidable or reversed on appeal.
Sure, because we're here because we live in Saco, and a lot of us have been here for a while, so we naturally know a lot of people. So inevitably, there'll be a scenario that we need to discuss. So
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. The next one's about prohibited appointments. I have these on here partly when I work with councils, but that's just, you guys don't do a lot of appointments. But under the municipal conflict of interest statute, no municipal officer can be appointed to any civil office of profit or employment which was created or the compensation of which was increased by the action of that official. In other words, if you're on a board and you vote to create a new position, and then you're like, and then I want that position, that's what or I increase the salary of it, now I want to be appointed to it, that's what it's prohibiting. I just like to point that out. You don't create any positions yourself as planning board members, for the most part. Again, the next one is, again, more general. It's not for you per se, but there's also certain incompatibility of offices under the statutes. Like, for example, a town manager can't also serve as a city councilor, or city manager can't serve as city. There's certain that are in statute. Tax collector can't serve as a selectman or assessor. This is an interesting. A municipal officer or their spouse can't serve on the Board of Appeals for that specific board. But you'll find things like that. There's also some common law incompatible offices that come up from time to time. But really what you need to ask yourself in those cases is essentially, are you going to be your own boss, right? Or there's something about the decisions you make in one role that will be incompatible with decisions in the other role. So that's one of those. Again, nothing really the planning board's necessarily going to deal with. The next slide does deal with a couple other conflict issues, though, specifically, which are, so we talked about appearances of conflicts, right? So potential relationships, things like that. One of those is, this next one is actually sort of a de facto, I put it in the de facto conflict category. It's called bias on relationships. What the law says is you should not be sitting on applications where the applicant is a relative of yours that's within the 6th degree of consanguinity or below. What that means is second cousins inclusive. So that's defined as too close. So maybe it's your third cousin, maybe it's okay. But if it's your third cousin, you should disclose it, probably, if you know that you're your third cousin. But yeah, consanguinity is one of those terms you learn in law school, and unless you're a trusted estates lawyer, you never learn again, unless you give this kind of training, which I do all the time. But that's what it essentially means, second cousin inclusive. It's seen as too close. You've got a sort of de facto bias potentially against that person, for that person.
But Phil,
Yeah,
I mean, you're talking about applicants.
applicants.
You're not talking about, like, I've disclosed numerous times, like, my mom is in a butter to the property.
Yeah. Yes, applicants, specifically. So people asking you for something,
Because
for
those
permission
are,
to do
yeah,
something.
I mean, those are disclosed and discussed, but
That's a
that has
very good
happened on occasion.
distinction, yes. This is specifically talking about making decisions about your relative. So who are the applicant? Same thing on the 10% test. That's about the applicant themselves. If, I guess to take your hypo, if the company you own is an abutter to an applicant, that's something you would disclose. You may or may not decide that you need to step down. I've seen abutters sometimes say, I really don't care one way or the other. I have no predisposition about this. I don't, so if you really feel that way and everyone on your board feels that way, you can sit there. But if, as an abutter, whether it's a company or individual, you think it's just too close to me, and honestly, I don't know if I can be unbiased, and that would be the same for the relative, right? Because if, like, your mom cares a lot about the application, passing or failing for that matter, then maybe you think it's too close, but maybe not. It's something to discuss and disclose.
So when we talk about the applicant, you speak of the applicant, what about the applicant's representatives? I mean, if it's your cousin that works for the engineering or the architect that's presenting in front of them, are they viewed as part of the applicant's
That's
team?
That's a good question. I think not technically, but it's still something, that's a minimum, you should disclose that, right? But it's not the applicant themselves. You see engineers, for example, present in front of boards all the time. But if it is your, but if it is your cousin who's the presenter, at a very minimum, you should disclose that. And maybe even think about stepping down. Like, even if you feel like you have no reason, because it's so close to you. But this rule, in my view at least, technically applies to the applicant. But again, that's an appearance of a conflict that maybe you can't overcome. And so for the public sort of trusting your decision, it's maybe one of those examples where you probably should step down. I'll tell you, in some small towns, it's very hard to do that, because ultimately you work with a lot of different people. It's a little easier in some of the larger towns in Maine, but there's some towns that everyone knows everybody. I mean, I work all over the state, and so you just have to, there's a lot of disclosure that's going on, but you work with people all the time. And so really it's what kind of financial relationship do you have? Do you have any bias for or against that person? Those are the important things to make sure you're thinking about and potentially disclosing. And speaking of, the last one I want to talk about was bias based on predisposition. That's another, it's both an appearance, but also in some ways a de facto conflict. It's an appearance if people think that you have an opinion about something for whatever reason. Maybe you have a relationship with them, they think you're going to be predisposed one way or another. That's a potential appearance, and it's got to be disclosed, and you ask yourself those questions, and the board votes. If you really are biased, then you should probably step away. That's considered that's potentially a conflict. And I would say almost certainly it's a conflict, because your job is to apply the law to the facts that are in front of you, right? If you really hate a project and you don't want to see it go forward, regardless of whether it meets the standards or not, that's an example where you're biased, and I would consider that a conflict of interest, and you should likely step down. You should ask yourself, can you really be unbiased in this particular position? Only you, again, will know that. There's sometimes it's obvious, and we can say, like, you signed a petition against it. That's the obvious kind, and I see that sometimes, right? Like, you sign, I do not want that thing in this town, I'm signing a petition. Well, then you should not be looking at that application, because you're not going to be able to look at it in an unbiased way. Because what if it does meet the standards? Are you still going to say no, right? And so that's like the obvious example. Less obvious is what's going on in your own head. And again, only you can answer those questions. So.
Phil, let's say on a worst case absolute scenario, we have a full board, we have 7 members, and let's say there's a project and there are 4 members for whatever reason, conflict of interest, and can't sit. What happens? Whether they're, for whatever reasons, but let's say of your 7 members, 4 recuse themselves for a particular application. What would happen, hypothetically?
So the council may have to appoint alternate members or new members to hear it. One thing I'd have to look at, and I didn't look at it before I came, I do have your ordinance, is that whether a quorum is of the members present or a member of the board as appointed. That's a distinction. So if it's silent, a quorum is a quorum of the number of seats, right? But you can actually use an ordinance, you can put in the ordinance something different, which is a majority of those present and voting. So anyway, that's a distinction you want to look at. But if you really just can't get to a quorum without that distinction, you may have to have, I've seen alternate members appointed by a council, for example.
Okay, I don't think we've ever been in a scenario like that or a situation even close to that, but
yeah,
just as we started to talk about it, just kind of popped into my head.
It does happen from time to time.
And I guess I'm only thinking in the sense of, I guess a more realistic expectation is we have 7 sitting members, and for some reason we have, I don't know, they're on vacation, someone's not here, something's happened, someone recused themselves, and we're down to 3 members at the table for an application, and what do we do?
So you'd have to table it. I would table it at that point.
That scenario,
or I guess no action could be taken, which is effectively taking it,
sure,
tabling it.
Yeah. Okay.
And then, you can see in that situation, maybe you will get a quorum if one of the reasons why you didn't get a quorum because someone was absent. And if honestly, if you don't, then it would have to, I think we'd have to talk with the council about alternate members, because otherwise you're putting the applicant in a difficult position because they need to get an answer. Sometimes ordinance will say if you don't vote within a period of time, it's deemed to be either denied or approved, typically denied, and then they can appeal it. But if it doesn't say that, it sort of sits in a limbo, and that's not good for anybody. So.
Yeah, so I just triple checked ours. Ours is members present for a quorum.
Okay.
So can I just ask for clarification then? And we've never had this issue, and I don't know if it warrants a whole lot of time other than the other evening, where we had a quorum, or if we had a quorum of just 4, and one needed to recuse themselves, that means those members are present, but you can't proceed because we don't have a voting member of 4. Is that correct?
Right.
Because once they're recuse themselves, that technically is no longer 4 voting members for that particular review.
That's right.
Thank you.
And I didn't mention it at the time, but and if someone does recuse themselves, you should really step off the dais and sit in the audience, or leave. You're allowed to sit and listen, though. What you should not be doing, and this I have to say this because it's come up before, is you can't be, however, signaling to the members of the board in a certain way. Because I like to say, like, you used to say leave the room. That's actually not the case. There's some case law that suggests people have a right, you still have a right as a resident to even participate, actually. If you completely say, I am done with, I have a conflict, you step up and you have a reason, like say you are an abutter, you still have a right to participate, and there's been a case about that. You have a right to be an applicant in front of your own board. Obviously, you've got to go through a bunch of conflict analysis when that happens, but you have a right to do that, and there was a case out of Wisconsin that said that because one of the things the law court said is we don't want to take away your rights to continue to be a regular resident of the town and ask for applications. So you can still sit, you just can't be like, winking and nodding if you're going to sit and watch it.
What if your facial expression is so much?
Right.
Because that would be me.
Right.
We asked Carrie Lynn to just back to the board.
Right.
Go behind the curtain.
So again, unless you're saying, I want to participate, right? So there is a way to participate if you feel like you need to. But, I only have 1 or 2 other things I'd like to go over, and it's particularly for new members, good to know sort of what your jurisdiction is and what other boards' jurisdictions are, just sort of the lay of the land, particularly in land use law and planning. So I sort of start with the council. So the council does have a limited role in land use. It's not limited, I should say. They have a policy role for the most part. The council in land use and planning adopts the comprehensive plan for the city, which is the guiding planning document for all of your land use ordinances. They have the authority to adopt a zoning ordinance, the site plan ordinance, the subdivision ordinance, the ordinances that you work with. And they can adopt contract zones. That's another type of zoning. It's a type of zoning that you're authorized to do if you allow yourself to do it, and you can do it in this. It's an optional type of zoning if you put it in your ordinances, and you do have it. And then finally, the council appoints you. So those are the roles of the council. The council does not have authority to make decisions on land use applications other than contract zones. They don't have the authority to do what you're doing in your seats. You're an independent body. Planning board serves as the municipal reviewing authority under the statute. You'll see that term of art sometimes in Maine law, the municipal reviewing authority. That's a fancy way of saying planning board, essentially. You are the reviewer for subdivisions under state law. You conduct public hearings on zoning ordinance amendments. You may see yourself in that role from time to time whenever there's it may not even come from you. The council may have started a zoning ordinance amendment, but you have to hold a public hearing on it. That's what the law requires. The planning board has to hold that public hearing. That's, in essence, everything state law gives you. So everything else comes from your local ordinances. And your local ordinances have given you authority to review conditional uses, site plans, again, subdivisions, shoreline zoning, master plan development, and those kinds of things. So you're going to be applying those ordinances to applications that come before you. Your decisions are appealable to Superior Court within 30 days. So So you'll sometimes see that. And then finally, there is a zoning board. Zoning boards are actually, unlike planning boards, there are some specific statutes around zoning boards. They're required, unlike planning boards, by law, if you have a zoning ordinance. So if you have a zoning ordinance, you have to have a zoning board. Zoning boards hear administrative reviews from decisions of the code enforcement officer. Some towns, they also hear appeals from the planning board before they go to court. You don't have that. I actually think that's a good idea, and I say that because you have two separate boards, but we still have some of those ordinances that do have these sort of inter-municipal appeal. And then, this is something for you to keep in mind, because it does kind of come up in your area, is only zoning boards can give variances from the zoning ordinance. So the dimensional standards, the space and bulk standards in a zoning ordinance, only zoning boards can do that. So sometimes you're asked to vary and you're not allowed to, right? And sometimes there's old language in ordinances and yours are okay. But you'll see some language that in essence tries to give a planning board a variance authority, and that's not allowed, and that will likely be struck down by court if it was ever appealed. Where it gets a little confusing is you can give waivers from non-zoning provisions. So you'll see waivers in site plan review ordinances, subdivisions. Those are standards that are applicable throughout the city. They're not applicable in particular zones. And that's one of the distinctions. So you'll see waiver authority both on submission requirements sometimes, standards, things like that. That is different than a zoning variance.
And that,
Yeah.
we do frequently, or I don't want to say frequently, but once in a while we do see items like that come up or discussion topics, and I think the board does a good job about confirming with staff this is an item that can be waived under site plan or subdivision, or it cannot be because it's a zoning
Yes.
and a land use and a dimensional standard. So the question comes up, I think, once in a while, and I think the board's been good about confirming that, verifying, explaining to applicants when.
That's good. Yeah, you have very good
appropriately.
staff that does, that gives you sort of comprehensive memos. I think they're very helpful.
Yeah.
Not every town has that. So yeah.
I was wondering if you could touch a little bit, you gave a very good breakdown of how council exists, and they create and adopt the ordinance, and those become our tools, right?
Right.
They're handing us the ordinance, in our case, has, site plan review and the criteria that we're doing. They also give us the long-range plan, or the comprehensive plan.
Right.
And, a few years ago, we ran into kind of some housekeeping issues where they had to be, relatively harmonious. The two had to be harmonious. And as we continue on, and now we have, a long-range planning committee that is giving some vision. And we start to end up with these, visions for certain zones, certain districts in our community. And those are all things that are kind of put on, I view it as our tools, right? They're put on our plate, and we're to review each one of these applications to each one of these standards. And as they become more in depth, is there a hierarchy of importance that they should be necessarily reviewed by? Because I find it more difficult. Yes, it's nice to have a lot of plans for our community, but when you start zooming in too much with additional plans for certain districts outside of, let's say, the comprehensive plan, there might be slight conflicts in there, and it just seems like there's a lot to review to try to be very thorough and fair to an applicant. Is our goal, is our objective really to be focusing, I would think should be zoning and comprehensive plan, and the other ones kind of help to provide more clarity as you zoom into that one particular area.
Yeah, it's a good question. So what the courts have said is that the comprehensive plan is simply that, a planning document, and including any kind of subsidiary plans, like some towns will do, like a Main Street plan or this plan. But they're simply plans, they're not regulatory documents. The regulatory documents are your ordinances, and those are what give your plans the regulatory teeth. And so that's where the plan comes into specifics. Your job is to apply the ordinance, not the plan. And in fact, I don't like to see, and I know you have this, I don't even like to see one of the standards be, is it consistent with the comprehensive plan? Because the ordinance is what needs to be consistent with the comprehensive plan, not an application. right? And one of the, and I didn't get into this very much in my training tonight, but there is due process, right? People have to, one of the things about due process is people have to understand what is being asked of you in terms of how can I get an approval for this, right? That means you need to have articulable standards that people can understand and provide information to show how I meet it or I don't meet it, right? Like traffic count, height, you name it, right? That you can provide water at a certain level. Those are articulable standards. Once it starts getting too vague, there's a potential due process argument, because what you're doing is you're inviting potential discrimination. That's what the courts have used, right? Because you're giving too broad of a standard for the planning board to apply. You can read it, you know, in other words, you could read that standard. If you can read a standard 4 or 5 different ways on whether someone could meet it or not, that's probably too vague. And that's a concept the court would look at. Is that standard too vague? It's unconstitutionally vague. People would not know how to meet that standard, right? You're giving too much discretion to the planning board. So that's one of the things I look at when I look at ordinances is, are they giving articulable standards? That's the language the court uses, right? You don't want it to be too vague. In the comprehensive plans have all kinds of things in them, if you've looked at them, right? They are somewhat vague. They are planning documents, right? Here's what we'd like our community to look like. And then the ordinances put that into place, right? And so that's the way the court would look at it. So there's a number of cases that sort of articulate it that way. So you should look at your ordinances. If there's a plan that's part of the ordinance, yes, you have to apply it. You'll see sometimes, for example, design plan, downtown design plan, or things like that that are technically ordinances. So yes, you need to apply that. If your question, is more general, like, are we doing too much planning, right? That's a level, that's the council's purview, right? And, you know, council and their various committees are looking at long-range planning committee. What are our vision for those areas, right? And those visioning documents are what's going to set up future ordinance changes, you know, potential business development, that kind of thing like that. I know that's sort of an all over their question answer, but
I think it was perfect because what you touched on is, like you said, you know, when we have that language, oftentimes, is it cohesive with our comprehensive plan?
right.
Or is it comply with our comprehensive plan? That's not really the bite of our review. That is, you know, it's a great tool, that's something council's doing, but that should be driving the ordinance changes so that we're focusing just on the ordinances as the application comes before us.
Because to use your term, what the court would look like if there's a challenge to an ordinance, for example, is it consistent with the comprehensive plan, right? And what you'll look to see is it harmonious? Use that word. Is it harmonious with it, or does it lead to sort of illogical, absurd results? Like, for example, you've got an area in your comprehensive plan that you've designed for rural residential, and these kind of things, and then your zoning ordinance says, and we can have all kinds of factories there. Right? If you didn't say in your comprehensive plan that we'd also like this to be industrial, that's probably not consistent with that comprehensive plan. But you would have already taken care of that through your zoning ordinance, right? You would have set up a zone consistent with that plan that says, here are the uses we want here. That's consistent with our vision for that district. So that's already done, and now you just apply it. What are they asking for here? Do they meet that standard? Is it an allowed use? Do they meet the setbacks? You know, that kind of thing.
And to Jeff's point, there's always some good discussion that comes about it when we have a particular project that we're really diving hard into those questions, and it's good because then we work with staff, long-range planning committee, and we work on tightening up on some of these areas. I don't want to say holes, but trying to make it more, you know, encompassing on everything to make it more clear and to make sure the board has the tools that we need to and that it's clear. So it's always, we have loads of good discussion here. So it's always for progress forward. So.
And I know that staff and I work typically with Emily, you know, she'll review the ordinances from time to time to make sure that they're consistent and that they're not too vague or that they're articulable standards for applicants to apply. And that would obviously ultimately be the council's decision on whether to adopt any ordinance amendments, but it's helpful to kind of do those reviews from time to time.
Yeah, and collectively, we're always looking to make it better, make it more clear. I think it benefits everybody. So,
Just two topics I want to and then I know it's getting late. We could talk for hours about fun things here, but I wanted to hit a couple things. Right title and interest, you'll see that sometimes. Does someone have? And for whatever reason, I've been getting a lot of those questions recently. The standard for someone to apply for an application in front of you is that they have to have some sort of right title and interest. That means they have to have the legal right to use the property in the way that they're asking you to use it, right? So they want to build some houses. Do they have a deed that allows houses or not, right? So that's what you're going to look at. It's actually a fairly low standard for your purposes. It can be a contract. It can be a purchase and sale agreement. It can be an option contract. It can be a lease. It obviously can be a deed. But they have to have some articulable legal relationship to that site to allow them. And when I say allow them to do what they're asking permission to do, where you see that happen, for example, if it's on its face, there's something in the application that says this can only be for this, right? A covenant of some kind. That's an example. Or you can't use the property this particular way. If it's on its face like that, then that likely doesn't meet right title and interest standards. If it goes beyond that, like there's a dispute on whether someone can or cannot do it, what we often say, and you've probably heard this advice too, that's beyond your jurisdiction, if you will. You have neither the authority nor the jurisdiction to hear those kind of things. That's an issue for the courts. It's a private property dispute, and you'll often hear private property disputes. When an application's in front of you and maybe someone doesn't like the application, one of the things they may point out, and maybe rightly, that this person doesn't have the right to do that. But you are not a title court. You're not here to determine private property rights between people. So what they just need to show you is on the face, did they give me a deed for that property? That's probably going to be enough for your purposes. There still may be a private dispute that's going to happen, right? Maybe there's an easement and they're arguing over the scope of that easement across the land. Maybe there's some covenant that is arguable about whether they can do it. Maybe there's a homeowners association declaration that somehow is involved, but that's separate from what you do. So that's where that comes up from time to time. You probably don't get that a lot, because if someone's going to take the time to come before you, they probably have those in line, but you will see some of those questions. And then finally, I like to point out, you do a good job here. Again, you've got good staff to help you, but written decisions are very important, and you should be making your written decisions with findings of fact that clearly articulate the reasons why you made a decision under each standard. It's important for applicants and the public, but more importantly in some ways, it's important for the court, because if it's appealed, the first thing a court does, and I see them all the time, is if there's not good findings of fact, the first thing a court does is send it back down. It happens. Sometimes it happens even, you go through the whole process, you get to the law court, and the law court sends it back down. Not enough. So we try to avoid that because that just, a year might have gone by, a lot of time and money spent, and now we're right back to the planning board. They didn't overturn your decision. They're saying, you don't have enough information, so what we're doing is we're filling in the facts, if you will, based on your decision. So you'll just want to make sure, and again, when you have good staff, they help you with that. Make sure that they're helping you. You'll review that findings of fact to make sure it accurately reflects what you did, but that's extremely important, is to make sure you go. So have a discussion under each standard. Give a reason, even if it's a sentence or two. Why does it meet the standard? Well, it meets the standard because the information in the packet shows that it does. That's better than nothing, right? But if you can even be more specific, it shows that it's not in the shoreline zone, or it's set back this much, or whatever it is.
Sure. Phil, could you give an opinion or recommendation of, let's say we've had maybe a scenario or two where, and the board tries not to present it this way. We always try to present a motion in the affirmative and then go from there. But what would be your recommendation for, I guess, for lack of a better term here, like a double negative, so that you find that it doesn't meet the ordinance, and then let's say there's a tie vote. So how would you, and a tie vote fails, so even if it were in the affirmative, we could look at both scenarios, but let's say it was a motion in the negative, and then it's a tie vote. Tie votes fail, but it's in the negative motion to say that the standard hasn't been met. So what would be a good way for the board to present findings of fact in a scenario like that? I think that
Yeah.
that was a scenario recently that
Yeah.
was quite confusing, I think, overall.
It is confusing when that happens, but I think, you know, my advice for that is that you should have members of each side give a reason why you thought the standard was met or not met, and the findings should reflect that. Because when you get to the court, it failed, but the court's gonna have to try to figure out why did it fail, right? So even though it was a tie. So I think the best case is to have people to say why they thought about it, you know, a little bit, and a little bit of facts on why they didn't meet it. And they're just both in there.
Okay, so maybe more of a scenario of a particular reason for each voting member of this was the reason for or against, and if that's part of the
Or
record,
that group could agree, so it's like you would normally if a majority votes, you don't give each particular member, you give a summary of what the
Sure,
board's
that's
doing.
fair. Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what I would do. So that's everything I had. Are there any questions? I sometimes get into other things, but I think it's enough for now. Yeah.
Could you briefly touch base on, we seem to struggle a lot, or at least I feel like I struggle a lot with financial capacity letters. Is there a template that is, you know, like universally accepted by the courts? So often it's, XYZ applicant has been a customer of ours for 5-6 years, and we feel like they have the sufficient funds to make this happen. Which is nowhere near what I read our ordinance to read. And then there was one that I think Jim and I both missed, and they pulled it up, and this particular institution was like super clear. This applicant has been a customer of ours for X number of years, and we fully anticipate funding this project in your town to construct, 50,000 square feet of building space, and essentially saying that we would fund them up to the estimated construction cost of da-da-da, provided that, permits and approval is granted. And I mean, to me, that was like rock solid. It was like, but it seems like oftentimes we get these letters and I feel like kind of on the fence. Did they technically meet the standard? It's not really saying that they're guaranteeing this project. It's not saying that they're even aware of what the project entails within the city. They just kind of asked for maybe a number. There's a value on there. I was wondering, is there something that could kind of help solidify that? Because our staff does such a great job with these checklists.
Yeah.
And we know we have all this material, but it's like sometimes I feel there's a lot of pieces of a financial guarantee or a financial capacity letter that should be included that isn't necessarily there. I don't know if that would be a tool that they could have to, provide applicants.
I think you could do that. I'm not aware of an actual template or anything like that. I do know that it's come up here. I had given advice to this board on financial capacity letters in the past. What I was trying to do is find that specific standard, so I'm not talking out of turn. But you do have some language in your ordinance that says the minimum of what needs to be required, right? And so a bank or a bank or someone else needs to show you. What I remember saying, and I still believe this, it's not your job, however, just like right title and interest, to start digging into someone's financial records, right? It's a minimum showing. And so in the same way that, someone shows you a deed or a contract to purchase the property, if you've got a letter from a bank, this is my view, if you've got a letter from a bank who says, I have a relationship with this person, they've got accounts, and in their view, they've got sufficient funds, to me, that's enough. To get into someone's like W-2s and all these, I mean, I've heard all kinds of things. I'm not saying that you're saying that, but I've heard that sort of an application getting sort of hung up on the specifics of someone's financial health. Does go a little bit beyond what I think a planning board's job is, right? So what you do, just like you rely on a traffic engineer's report, right? You can rely on that because they're an expert. You can rely on a banker's. Now, if there's a reason not to rely on it, like you've got some information that suggests that it's not trustworthy, that's different, right? But if someone submits an application and these people bank with me and they have enough capacity or we're going to lend to them, that's likely enough. Now, I say that, and I do know there are some instances where you may want to ask some more specific questions. If, for example, there's some significant public infrastructure implications that will come up, right? So in other words, if they don't finish it and something could potentially be left unfinished in a way that would be detrimental to the city, yes, I think you want to do a little more due diligence, but
Yeah, I guess, thank you for putting this up in front of us.
what section is that? I can't read it here.
So we're on section 188, 602, looks
Okay.
like B.
Yeah, I did bring the ordinances, so I'll take a look.
And, you know, I think it's pretty solid, and maybe that's the best place. Maybe we need to look at a few changes that might
Yes,
just
there it
reference,
is. There it is, yeah.
that may just reference the project location, kind of brief description of scope, and estimated cost, which is what we have in there. Because I think by tying those together now, we know that lending institution is well aware of this project and is not unaware that this applicant might be before two other boards in other areas, all using the same financial capacity letter. But if they reference our town, our project
Yep.
that's before us, I think that just helps tidy it up. Because I agree with you. If the bank says, yes, we agree,
Yep.
but it would be like having a wetland study saying that, well, we went to a project in your town and he met all the wetland requirements, never mentioning map and lot or address. I mean, it's too blanket, and I think
see what you're saying, yeah, but-
tidying it up.
It's got a minimum do this, and it is, luckily, I said exactly, I think, what it was in there, right? It's got to be a bank, it's got to say that they have a relationship with that person, and that they have sufficient funds committed or access to funds, meaning they're going to lend to them to do the project. Reference the cost and a cost estimate. So that's what, under your ordinance, which is actually a little bit more specific than some, that's what it requires. So that you should just make sure that each of those provisions are checked off. I don't see why you couldn't have a template on your website. There are sometimes templates for financial guarantees or performance guarantees, for example. Some towns will have, here's what an escrow letter of credit looks like, or an escrow agreement. So those happen. You can see them on some cities' websites. We have some templates. So you could have something similar for financial capacity. This is what we want it to look like. We need you to say these things. So yeah, that could be helpful to an applicant and to you, quite frankly.
So, Phil, one piece to this that I'm reading here and sort of relates to my question I'm going to ask. The financial and technical capacity we get, or the financial capacity we receive, that is not something guaranteed or locked in for that project. Meaning, during the review, if we receive a letter from Bank A and it's actually Bank C that the developer gets a loan for the project of, there's nothing that says that can't happen. And then
That's right.
halfway through the project, something could happen, and they could change programs. They could get additional investors or whatnot. There's nothing that
No.
prohibits any of that, right?
Absolutely not, no.
So I think that's also part of maybe the hurdle that we have sometimes. But one piece here that it talks about, right in A, right? Construct, operate, and maintain the development.
Yeah, and that's the technical capacity side of it.
Okay.
So A is so it's financial and technical capacity, right? And so the first one, the way I read it, to all these things, so that includes evidence number one, A1, prior conduct as a measure of willingness to meet all terms and conditions of approval, history of, violations, for example, of ordinances or poorly completed projects. So I look at that as sort of the technical capacity, the sort of desire. And then B, as evidence of financial capacity, that's that standard. And then C says you have to approve both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. You answered the question before
Yeah.
I even said
Yeah.
it. So that's the piece that I want to ensure that I guess we're all under the understanding of it's A, sort of technical, B, financial.
Yeah.
Okay.
It doesn't say it that way, but if you read it, that's the way it's sort of laid out.
Yeah.
But yeah, to finish up with your question, yeah, you're not regulating someone's sort of financial, you're not getting involved in their business dealings. Think of it that way. They get to run their business the way they want to. What you're seeing is, do they meet the standards? One of them is, do they have the financial capacity to do it? That's about it. You're not going to get in, and I wouldn't recommend you get into, no, you can't lend with this guy, you can't borrow from that guy. I mean, that's way beyond your jurisdiction. They just need to have, they do need to show that they have that financial capacity from somebody, some institution. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
All right, that's all I have this year.
Any other questions from board members? Thoughts? Great.
All right,
Fantastic.
thanks very much. Have a
Thank
good
you,
evening.
sir.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so continuing along, Shannon, I believe our next item is an IT training video.
Yes, that's correct. So we have 3 IT training videos that we're going to watch basically in quick succession. I think Alex is actually queuing them for us right now because the screen just went dark. And that was not me. So he hides behind the curtain. So,
Like Oz.
yes, pay no attention to the man behind the curtains.
It's like Oz.
So,
You might have subscribed to receive marketing materials or a newsletter of some kind and thought that spam might be potentially harmful. Spam tries to sell you something rather than convince you to share protected information. So if you see an email like this, you're safe to delete it. However, there are threats that lurk in your inbox in the form of phishing. Phishing is when a malicious individual attempts to convince their target to provide sensitive information using email as a primary tool.
Looking at this email when it came in on my computer, the first thing that popped up was the big yellow banner that says that the email originated from outside of the city domain. Anything that has that banner that comes from someone that works at the city, like this email is supposedly from the city administrator, gives sort of a red flag to me. It should not have that banner if it's coming from inside our network. At the very top of the email, above the yellow banner telling me that it's from outside the city domain, the email address in the brackets next to Brian's name is actually canerathbrian@fish.form. Obviously, that's not a legit email.
After you receive an email, it is always a good idea to check the sender. At a quick glance, you can tell if it is from outside our organization if our emboldened banner has been added to the top of the email. Another way to identify the sender is to check the sender's email address. In the email, we can see that Brian's email did not come from a sacomaine.org address.
When I get an email and I think it might be phishing, one of the things that I do is I will check to see who did it go to. Did it go to me? Did it go to other people in the organization?
It's always a good idea to check the to field of an email and ask yourself these questions. If you're the only recipient, does it make sense that you are the only one to get this? If you are not the only recipient, do you recognize the group or other recipients? Are you expecting an email from this person? Answering no to any of these questions may indicate that the email you are looking at is a phishing attempt.
He says, "Good day. Please complete this employee satisfaction survey." Brian's never sent me an email that just says, "Good day. Please complete this." So that would be a little bit of a tip-off. The email asked me to follow a link, which is interesting, and just to go to a link, which I will not do. And then if you complete this survey before, I love how the spelling is obviously wrong, so that's always a good indicator, especially because some people do misspell words in emails, and you might know some of those people, but Brian usually does not misspell words in emails, so this is not from Brian.
While reading through an email, pay close attention to the language. Many phishing emails have spelling and grammatical errors, unnatural ways to present information, a sense of threat or urgency, discussions of payment or money, or requests to provide a login or other personal information. Any of these could be an indication of a phishing scheme.
And if you hover over the link, it also warns me that it's no good.
That's correct. Hovering over a link will reveal where it'll take you. So when you did that on Brian's email, you saw one strange link and not something that you would expect.
If I have a question about whether it's authentic or not, sometimes I'll actually call the person that it's masquerading as, just to call them to see if they actually sent this or not.
After going through all of that, you still think your email might be legitimate. The next step is to contact the person who emailed you by phone using a known good phone number. This will either eliminate any doubt that they sent the email, or it'll let them know that their account has been potentially compromised.
I would just mark this as fish alert, which I do mark a lot of things as fish alert, so.
If you suspect that an email is a phish, feel free to report it using the fish alert button. This is a tool that forwards the email to IT to investigate and deletes it from your mailbox. To use it, click the Fish Alert button from the Home menu in Outlook, then click Fish Alert. This function also works from Outlook on the web. If you see a phish email while on your cell phone, you can delete the message so you can avoid accidentally clicking the link. We've gone over how to avoid a phishing email, but what happens when you do fall victim? The first thing you should do is change your password, and any password that is close to the compromised one, to something new and unique. Next, let IT know of the potential compromise so that we can monitor your accounts for suspicious activity. After a compromise, you may not see the effects for a few days, weeks, or even months. If you start to get MFA prompts that you are not expecting, do not approve them, as this could be the bad actor. If coworkers start asking you about unusual emails, other strange behavior, the bad actor could have access to your account. If you'd like to further discuss phishing or other IT-related topics, please reach out to the IT department with a help desk ticket.
An improperly secured workplace can be far too easy to find. Do you have confidential documents lying about? Passwords book left in an open drawer? Or an unlocked workstation when you are away? If so, the password pilferer may strike. Legend has it, the password pilferer hones in on a messy desk. See how you can easily spot sensitive information on the documents. The password pilferer can swiftly glance around, learn what he needs, and disappear back into the shadows. A clean desk acts as a natural repellent to the password pilferer. And no, this does not mean you need to clean off your candy jar. However, you must remove any documents that might have confidential information on it while not in use. To prevent documents from being read and pilfered, you should file away sensitive documents in a locked drawer as soon as they are no longer needed. Turn any documents that you still need but are not actively using upside down. Shred any documents you no longer need. Use electronic documents whenever possible. Without taking these measures, the password pilferer could use that information to steal your cyber identity, potentially sell it on the dark web, attack your organization, harm innocent bystanders, or commit fraud. Under keywords or mousepads, inside of drawers, and attached to monitors and desks. That's right, the password pilferer knows where you are hiding your passwords. If you think you have found the best place to store your password, just remember, he has password in his name. Instead of storing a written account of your digital identity, keep your passwords committed to memory or in a password manager. When you step away from your desk, do you remember to lock your computer? If not, the password pilferer may not need your credentials to pose as you. Even if you are running to the bathroom, you still need to lock your terminal. You never know how long you might be gone. Simply press the Windows and L keys together to quickly secure your machine and thwart the password pilferer. The password pilferer does not always work alone. Aided by CryptoCracker, they can compromise your workstation with ease. That's why you need to ensure your computer receives important updates. To do this, simply restart a computer whenever you are done using it and do not turn it off. This will allow the device to download and install updates overnight. Remember, the best defense against the password pilferer is to attend a clean workspace. Keep important documents away from wandering eyes. Passwords should never be stored in accessible locations. Lock your workstation whenever you do not have line of sight. Keep your computer at the sign-on screen overnight so that the Information Technology Department can apply updates. Stay safe. You never know when the password pilferer will strike.
Here we see Stephen the Mouse. To many, this may seem like an ordinary critter preparing to check his email. However, what we are about to witness is an unsuspecting victim of cybercrime. Like many of us, Stephen is taking advantage of free public Wi-Fi to catch up on some work. But little does he know, there is someone hiding amongst the Wi-Fi network. A cybercriminal intercepting the data of anyone unfortunate enough to be connected. Now, Stephen has logged into his online banking. His private information, username and password are now in the hands of the masked bandit. This kind of data theft happens more often than you may think, and it all could have been avoided with a few simple precautions, such as using mobile data or connecting to his secure Wi-Fi at home for sensitive activities like banking. Public Wi-Fi may be convenient, but it's not always secure. Be cautious and think twice before connecting. What's this? This coffee shop has a QR code to access their menu placed on each table. A simple scan and you're ready to order, right? Surely Stephen is not going to... Oh, he scanned the code without checking to see where the link was going to take him. He seems confused. Let's take a closer look. His phone is cycling through several websites before directing him to a PDF of the menu. Ah, there is the issue. The actual company logo and menu do not match the site the QR code brought him to. The masked bandit strikes again. They place the QR code on the table for someone just like Stephen to scan. Now, the masked bandit has access to Stephen's phone and personal data from anywhere. If only Stephen had checked the link before clicking it to make sure it belonged to the coffee shop, or asked a staff person to confirm the QR code was legitimate. He could have avoided falling for a scam like this. QR codes are convenient, but they're not always safe to scan. It looks like Stephen has decided on breakfast, and he begins to approach the counter. Oh, what's this? A mysterious USB thumb drive laying on the counter seems to have caught his eye. The unsuspecting creature doesn't realize the danger in his grasp. USB drives can hold malicious software like viruses, ransomware, or even spyware. Curiosity can lead to danger. When it comes to unknown USB drives, it's better to be safe than sorry, and only plug one in if you know where it came from and what it contains. Could this be the work of the masked bandit? For now, Stephen places his breakfast order with the barista. What is Stephen doing now? Ah, it appears that he is examining the payment processing unit. A wise move. Devices called skimmers can be placed between the point-of-sale terminal and the customer, allowing whoever placed it to steal credit card information. Luckily, Stephen notices something suspicious. There is a raised edge on the card reader, and he notifies a staff member immediately. By checking for irregularities, he not only protected himself, but also helped others from falling victim to fraud. Stephen doesn't have enough cash on hand, but is able to use a contactless payment method by tapping his phone to pay, to still get his breakfast while also avoiding this potential catastrophe. Now, Stephen will be able to enjoy his Oh, a phone call from an unregistered phone number. Who could it be? It appears the caller says they are Stephen's bank and notice some suspicious activity. They ask him to verify his address and social security number. Stephen is confused and uncertain, so he hangs up. Marvelous. Stephen avoided a potentially dangerous trap from a scammer impersonating the bank and urgently requesting information. By hanging up, he kept his personal information safe from a scammer. Stephen chooses to call his bank directly, using the number on the back of his card. That way, he can hear about his accounts from a trusted source. Phone scams are on the rise, but with a little caution can be avoided. And thus concludes today's Security in the Wild program. Stephen encountered a few of the many dangers lurking out there in the wilderness. While he fell victim to a few, he did manage to avoid the scam phone call and the dangerous USB drive. Wait, no, Stephen. To navigate the wild safely, please remember the essentials. Do not conduct private business while using public Wi-Fi. Always check where a QR code leads before using it, and do not scan if you cannot verify the address. Never insert an unknown thumb drive into your device. Avoid talking with scammers or giving out personal information to unknown callers. Stay vigilant out there, fellow explorers. The digital wilderness is full of risks, but with caution and knowledge, you can stay safe. Thank you for tuning in. Good night and stay secure.
So,
A mini computer, I mean, it was perfect.
yeah, they used a green screen, they got puppets, we did that all in-house. Our communications department and our IT department is phenomenal, and
But I think they missed the most dangerous part of that all, was putting the coffee cup on your computer. I mean, that'll destroy the whole computer. So. But that was very good.
That was good, yes. Thank you. All right, any general correspondences this evening, Shannon?
no, I do not have any general correspondences for everybody this evening. As a just a reminder before everybody leaves, I know we have a couple more items on the docket, but we do have plan sets to be signed over on the table. But that's about it for general correspondence.
Great, thank you. Any planning board updates or discussions?
I have none for you this evening.
Great, thank you. Planning board members, any questions, comments from the board at this time? Great. All right, well, that concludes our meeting this evening. Thank you again to Shannon and the team here for putting this together. It was great. Very informative tonight, I think, so much appreciated. Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, I don't know how we're going to handle, with Camille on board. We've had like kind of different slow entrances, but where she's now done her training, and do we want to kind of go over what we'll ask of her for new or pending applications, kind of direct her where she can find the recorded videos if she wants to watch, because usually we'll have them watch the recorded videos, and before we start review or continue review of that, they usually tell the chair how you prepared, that you watched the video, and that way you could participate and continue discussion.
Yeah, no, Jeff, that's a good question, and it is something we'll work with staff and make sure that we get Camille set up. We'll have an iPad that we talked about, Saco email, and you'll become part of the link and all the agenda items that we'll get. We'll make sure that our agenda's coming up, that those items will get you minutes and all the information, as Jeff was mentioning and asking about. That way you can make sure you can participate. So during those meetings, we'll introduce you as a new member, of course, and let the applicant know that you've caught up, and assuming you will, I'm sure you will. And then we'll just sort of dive right into it. So do you have any questions for us or any thoughts or anything? I know there's a lot tonight, but.
No. Is this working? I'm getting used to
it. It is, yeah.
Oh,
might have to pull
there,
forward a little
there you
bit.
go. No. Everything is very much, thank you so much for allowing me to be part of this group. I'm very excited. And yes, today was very informative. So appreciate all of the training. I feel like I'm ready to hit the ground running.
Good. And we, of course, at any point, don't ask any questions. Don't be bashful. I think the board we have a lot of good discussion. So it's, yeah, I don't know what else to add. Any other words of wisdom?
Welcome aboard.
Thank you, guys.
All right, great. And with that, we will adjourn at 8:59 p.m. Thank you.